Can I welcome you to the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee meeting of Tuesday the 12th of January. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you had a good, although I suspect very busy Christmas and New Year period. Just before we kick off, just to make members aware of the papers being circulated to everyone on the December flooding events update. For members' information, I asked for a report to come before committee following Storm Desmond that obviously hit the region at the beginning of December. Now, obviously, after that storm, to say that events took over and took another twist would be an understatement, and obviously the region was hit badly by Storm Frank, so officers have obviously had to significantly rewrite the report to update the report on the contents of the Council's response to the second storm that hit the region, so that's the reason why it's obviously a late report today, but I'm pleased that officers have been able to pull together the information in time for members to consider the report before us today. Okay, can I ask just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded and will be subsequently available for the public for listening. Could I ask for the Sederunt and any apologies?
Good morning, everyone. We have 19 members present. We are quorate, and I have apologies from Councillor Gilroy and Councillor Nicholl.
Okay, thanks very much. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, before we go into the agenda items then, in the reports, can I just make you aware, obviously we'll have a recess to give members an opportunity to read the late report before we consider it, so I'll take that item at the end of the agenda. Okay, item number 3, the minute of the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee meeting of the 10th of November. Are members happy that's a true record of the meeting? Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, the minute of the House and Subcommittee of the 19th of November. Can I ask if members of the House and Subcommittee are happy that's a true record of the meeting? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, can we move on to item number 5, which is our regular budget monitoring report. Can I ask the Director if there's anything to add to the report before members?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can I open it up to members' questions? Ian?
Thanks, Chair. I've got 3 questions. Just on the first one, that's on number 4, governance assurance. I was under the impression it was now standard practice where there were budgetary reports that corporate management team consultation and agreement would be sought, and it's not actually recorded in there. The second one is, can you maybe elaborate a bit more on 3.2.4 about the grey mileage? And finally, on 3.3, I see again energy saving in particular is proving challenging. Can you elaborate on that and explain why? Because I thought we had a programme of carbon reduction energy saving units. What is the problem here? Oh, and what is RHI? Because it's not in the abbreviated glossary at the back.
Chair, I'll take. Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Councillor Dick. Chair. Yes, I think that's an omission on our behalf, and I'll double check the reference to CMT, so apologies for that. Getting a nod from the accountant on that. 3.2.4, this is the issue that we've reported throughout the year where savings have been made on grey mileage throughout the Council, and to balance our account, because we are responsible for the fleet, we have to get a recharge into our account to balance off that saving against ourselves. And that is being done as we speak. We're trying to bring that to a conclusion. We're also accelerating savings in fleet to help balance the books as well. So that will help us as we move towards the end of the year to get a balanced budget. And on the final one, we have had difficulties. Some of these difficulties are associated with the feedback tariffs changing in the various dates through the year, not giving us the return we expected. But I think the best thing I can do is just give all members a short brief following the meeting on the issues that we're having.
Thanks for that, Alistair. Just Could you ensure that there's some elaboration about the programme of installation of energy-saving measures? Some more specifics, because, like I said, I mean it's been progressed through numerous strategic budgets. There was an expectation that it would be an ongoing programme, and there just seems to be a stall. And I'm still none the wiser as to why actually we can't be putting, for example, photovoltaics up and exploring the other opportunities, microhydro and whatever. Really think that this, given the budgetary constraints, this is an area that really we should be prioritising.
Chair, I can assure Councillor Dick that we are investigating all measures that we can possibly deliver, but again, these have to have a rate of return to make them value for money, and with the feedback tariffs reducing, it's not necessary that the capital expenditure is reducing in the products that we're putting up to, so we have to make sure the whole thing balances. But I can assure you that we are doing everything possible to take these measures forward.
Thanks, Chairman. Same couple of points, but I think on 3.2.4, then what I'm hearing is Alistair saying is that the feed-in tariffs are reducing, so therefore we didn't achieve the same level of income from the renewable heat incentives. In regards to the grey mileage, I looked through the appendices as well, trying to get a figure on that. I just wondered, what is the actual figure? I couldn't see it. I may be missing it. It's maybe staring me in the face in regards to how much is it we're actually down by.
Currently down by £60,000. It's the integrated transport and commissioning line.
Okay, thanks for that. I didn't see that. I seen that, but I didn't see it absolutely clear. So in regards to the further measures to be identified, 123, could you give us any more information in regards to that? What that's looking like? What do you think that'll be?
Well, we're continuing to manage our budgets very tightly, very prudently. And as the year moves to a close, we'll have more information. If you remember, this report is based on December, and as we move through, we should get the benefits from the prudent budgeting that we're carrying out. And obviously the final report will give you detail of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other members? Okay, can we go to the recommendations? Are members happy to note 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4? Thanks very much. Okay, can we turn now to item number 6? Again, it's a regular update on the capital programme. Can I ask the Director if there's anything to add to the report before members?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can I open it up to members' questions with the usual appeal that will be ignored by everyone, which is not to get too parochial and ask about your various paths in your ward, but think strategically. Roberta, it's a ward question, Roberta.
Thank you, Chair. It's item 6 that we are on, and it's regarding the replacement access to Sandhead School. My first point I'd like to make is that Sandhead School is already DDA compliant from an access off the main road at a much higher level. Disabled children would be delivered to the school via that route, either arriving by car or bus. Is it mandatory to have to build a new access to complete DDA compliance? What the school community, including the parent council members, want is a basic, safe route for children and parents with buggies, prams and toddlers to walk up to the school. It is important to emphasise there is no other safe walking access. I feel that the report in front of me offers a vastly over-engineered and expensive solution. I am confident that no other school in the whole of Scotland has such a dangerous walking access. The problems are not going to go away, and what I would want to see is a further report to come in front of us with a simpler, safer route at a more affordable cost and as soon as possible, which could be completed in the coming summer terms, and I will so move.
Want to respond, Stephen?
Yes, the report on the Sandhead steps in terms of the access options really was working to current guidelines or good practice and council guidelines in terms of the access. So the options, there's a number of on-road options, but the the off-road option in terms of replacing existing steps with a ramped system was looking at gradients that would comply with good practice and council guidance on DD accessibility. And as the councillors pointed out, that has produced an option that is quite expensive in terms of the range of options that we've considered within the report to satisfy or to respond to the problems that have been identified with the existing stepped access owned by DGHP. What I can do with the report is I can look at further options. I can look at in terms of you're telling me the community aspiration is for something similar to be replicated, and we could certainly look at that. And I can also look at in terms of steps, I could also look at a ramped access with less of a gradient. I think that we would need to just qualify that in terms of the risks, but also I'm not convinced that it would save a lot in terms of the slope stability and the issues with putting any sort of ramped access in at that location. But it might be that certainly that the cost of a replacement stepped access could be a lot less, and I can raise instructions with our engineers to have a look at that.
Thank you. Well, the access they're using at the moment is perpendicular. It's dangerous. The steps are too big. Buggies and prams have to be left at the bottom of the road. So I would welcome a report coming as soon as possible that may be acceptable and affordable.
Okay, members happy with that? We'll get further options coming forward. Okay. Take Brian, then Graham.
Thanks, Chair. I take on board your earlier comments on this item, not to become too parochial. And in that vein, I wonder why this report has actually been brought to this strategic committee at this stage, and why it's not gone through at least area committee prior to any report being brought forward here. I find it curious that area committee have not had an input into this strategic committee's considerations on this matter. I'm perfectly happy for the matter to go back to the drawing board, as it were, and the other options to be brought forward. But it's not members that are being parochial, I would suggest, in this instance.
Well, this is the capital programme for this committee. Therefore, if there's changes to the capital programme, it has to be agreed by this committee, and this happens every single time we receive a capital report, in the same way that education will receive a capital report on the schools programme, in the same way that Policy and Resources will receive a capital report on their programme of improvements to properties, and I'm not aware of any of those reports going to area committees, and if they did, then we would probably never make a decision over a period of time. If there's something specific that has the area committee interest in it, then maybe that's something that should be considered. If there's a particular item that you think should go to area committee before it comes to this committee, we can certainly do that. But the routine allocation of funding from the capital programme that this committee is responsible for happens on a regular basis. It's a routine report. As I say, if there are specifics that you think should go to area committee from the report, then that's something that the members can consider.
I thank you for that, Chair, but I would suggest that in origin, this capital expenditure was something that the local members did have input to, and the area committee an opportunity to have input to. And at this stage, we seem to be back at the drawing board, as I said, and it would be helpful for members of this committee at this stage to at least have the background of the input and feedback from members at local level with regard the impact insofar as Sandhead Village and school is concerned.
Sandhead one, yeah. Well, one suggestion is that particular report that Stephen's suggesting he's going to bring forward should go to area committee first for feedback before it comes here. Would members be happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay, I've got. Sorry. Okay, I've got Ian, Dick next, and then. Sorry, I think I've got Graham first. I think. Sorry, then Ian, Dick, then Brian. No, I've got Brian already.
Could I just say my point's covered and you can take my name off?
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to know that it's not been discarded completely and that we're going to go back and try and revamp it and make it more financially possible. while we're doing that, I'm not precious whether it comes to the area committee first or not. I think the area committee will take a view on it, and if it's felt that's the way to go, quite happy for it to go there first. But DGHP own the land in question. The steps service DGH houses at the top of the village. So could we, when we are revamping the report, could we get some input from DGHP and any financial contribution they're prepared to make included in it, please?
Okay, Alistair.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. In an effort to be helpful, you know, there is precedent along the lines of what Graham has just alluded to, because we had a situation in Garrison where we were providing a bridge over the mill Lade, and the issue was raised with DGHP, and to be fair to them, they appreciated that not only would it be a benefit for the school children, but it would also be a benefit for their tenants living in that part of the village. And they had no difficulties in signing up to making the appropriate financial contribution. Unfortunately, the scheme didn't proceed, but it certainly was not through any reluctance on DGHP's part, Chair. So I would like to think that, you know, when the approach is made, we'd be pushing in something akin to an open door.
We'll make sure that DGHP are approached in the preparation of that report. Ronnie?
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate this is a list of capital projects that affect the whole region. But on the key issues, specifically mentioned Scott Street in Annan. So I've not been parochial, I'm just reading off the report here, Colin. This was put in last year and it didn't go ahead for various reasons. It's subject to a bid for Community Links, which is at Policy and Resources on Thursday, I believe. If it's not successful, that bid, will Scott Street then be prioritised and go ahead anyway? Because locally it's causing a bit of grief.
Yep, in terms of the bid, if it was already on the programme, I think what we've done is we obviously try to work between the programmes and see where there's overlap and there's interlink, and if there's a benefit in holding off. If we're bringing the Community Links project forward and it can get funded, or we're looking at the junction signalisation, we try and do that in the right order, like we kind of align the works and the road works we're doing in Dumfries and the signalisation with the new school there. Is it a kind of smaller scale? We try and align these projects. Yes, the surface and the carriageway works obviously been identified as a need to be taken forward. If the other project does fall or isn't taken forward, we'll come back and do the surfacing scheme, would be my understanding of the situation. Okay.
Okay, Roberta.
Just one final comment. Can you give me any idea of when this will actually come in front of the area committee? Because I am concerned that another summer term will pass and nothing be done.
Do we have an estimated time for the development? We've obviously got to look at options first before we start writing reports. It's a task in itself.
I mean, it's probably reasonable to give my engineer and design colleagues maybe a month or so to pull together a revised report, consult with DGHP, look at the additional options that have been requested, and then we can look at how we get that onto the area committee agenda.
Okay. Dennis?
Yep. Thanks, Chair. In the recommendations, there are several issues concerning the area I represent along with Craig, 2.7, 2.10 and 2.11 at least, and I would just like to be able to speak to officers after the meeting to get some updates rather than say anything here because they are technically parochial. So if I could get the chance to speak to an officer about these following the meeting, I'd be quite happy.
Good point, Dennis, good point, thank you for that. I'm sure that will happen. Ian?
Just a brief one. I was going to bring up the Scott Street one as well, but Ronnie's already brought it up. But just in regards to, will it be put on the front end of the workload or the programmed work when it comes to the new coming year, this new coming after April financial year?
What we'll tend to do, there's a number of schemes that are identified in the capital programme here, and we're showing them as being postponed, particularly in the surface dressing. And part of that was to do with just balancing the costs. We brought a lot of schemes forward. And obviously the surface dressing is a kind of finite programme. Where we've postponed schemes, we would put them as priorities, and the surface dressing schemes that are postponed will take place in the kind of May, June, July period anyway, so they would be done at the start of the year. Where generally we've postponed surfacing schemes, it can be because there's one of the schemes that we've postponed in Lochmaben in particular is related to development there, so we won't take the scheme forward, but it will be in line with the development. And the likes of the B721 at Scott Street, Annan, So that the kind of timescale will be driven by our potential to see, the bigger picture, the bigger project coming forward together with funding from a number of areas. But as I said, if that can't be realised, then the surfacing scheme with application would still come forward as a priority in next year's programme.
Okay, members, can we turn to the Jeff?
Just a minor point, 3.6, that table with the rural authorities. Why are the authorities anonymised rather than just named?
In terms of the road condition indicator, it's not for me to publish other authorities' road condition data, particularly on a ranked basis. If people want to see that the full data set is available through the Improvement Service website, I'm not sure. I would suspect it might be. I'm not sure if it's anonymised there or not, but I don't feel it's for us to publish reports on other authorities' data, particularly given this data has only been released really in the past month or so, and those other authorities might not have time yet to report to their committees or to deal with the kind of public interest or the media interest in publishing their RCI data. So I would expect them to anonymise my data for comparison purposes. In fact, the rural authorities are, we can tell you who they are and if that's of interest, but it's really very similar. It's Highland, it's Scottish Borders, Perth and Kinross are in there, Angus, Aberdeenshire, Argyll and Bute. So in that mix, there's the authorities that we've got a very similar rural, dominantly rural road network that we compare ourselves to for ranking purposes.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That was going to be one of my questions. The other one, it's not really a question, it's on the table 3. At the last EAI committee, there was a statement made that Annandale's roads were far worse than anybody else's. I think if you look at that table, it proves that Annandale's roads aren't worse than at least one other area. The average overall is the same, and in the 8 separate classes, Wigtonshire's below Annandale in 4 of them, so Annandale isn't the worst.
Okay, on that point, I'll move to the recommendations. Can we turn to recommendation on page 23, members? Are members happy to note 2.1? 2.2? Note 2.3? Note 2.4? Happy to agree the allocation of £50,000 from the Dumfries Town Centre Regeneration Capital Programme to the Guild of Players for the Territorial project? Okay, recommendation 2.6. Members happy to agree a further report on a new school access footpath at Sandhead Village, and for that report to be consulted with the area committee prior to coming before this committee, as well as DGHP to seek a financial contribution to any programme. I was happy with that, and I'm sure that you'll come up with far more eloquent words than I've just uttered there, but we get the point. Okay, are we happy to note 2.7? 2.8, 2.9, 2.10. Are we happy to agree 2.11? Yeah. Happy to agree 2.12? Happy to note 2.13? Note 2.14? Agree 2.15? And agree 2.16. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, can we turn to item number 7, which is the Director's 6-month assessment of the business plan. One slight typo in 3.2. There is one target currently not met, and members will have the exception report within the appendix. Can I ask the Director if there's anything he would like to add to the report before members?
Thanks, Chair. Just that one issue that you've raised on page 99, the first page of the report, target not met and out with acceptable limits. We've got 0, it is in fact 1, and you have the exception report with the committee papers. Thank you.
Okay, can I open the report up to any members' questions? I expect that's a sign of the excellent progress being made, that there are no members' questions. No? Jim, almost.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just my normal gripe. There are 3 statuses that are given as green. There's 2 on page 104. It's supporting a fair local trading environment and the Dumfries and Galloway Animal Health and Welfare Framework. One's at 0%, the other one's at 25%. They both end in March 2016. And another one on page 107, prevention of the sale of unsafe goods to children. It's at 0%. Its due date's March 2016. I just can't see how they can be at an okay status.
Right, we'll get an answer from Steve on these issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Those are both trading standards projects for this year, and essentially we're in the process at the moment of updating Covalent, but I can assure members that progress has been made on each of those projects. They form part of the trading standards team plan, and we are currently on target in terms of the inspections that we're due to be carrying out. The issue is about getting the milestones updated onto Covalent. So those that report of 0% progress is not actually a reflection of what's happened on the ground. So we're just lagging behind slightly in getting Covalent up to date on that. So I apologise, Chair, for that, but I can assure members that good progress has been made on each of those projects.
So in terms of the target due dates, they're both likely to be met, is that the...
They're both on target to be met, which is probably why the status is still showing as green. What hasn't happened is that the milestones haven't been updated to turn the 0% into where they should be, which is probably around about 60-70% for each of them complete.
So really in old money, it's the work's been done, it's just the paperwork's not been filed yet.
You've used that phrase before somewhere, Jim. I think that'll be taken on board, that obviously prior to the report going out, just to make sure that it's updated. But key point is obviously the due date are still on target. Ronnie?
It's not a question, it's really an observation. On page 108, and it's the average number of days lost, and both top categories there are below the target or the figure, which is probably the first time in a wee while we've managed to achieve that, which is excellent news, and well done to the staff for hanging in there, if you like. I'm just wondering what mitigation has been put into to achieve that. This doesn't really go into a lot of detail, but past months or past reports we've had in the red or amber, I can't remember now, but that's certainly a good news story as far as attendance. I just wondered whether it's occupational health or support systems that's helped this.
Thanks, Chair. I think for both these indicators, we report regularly that we're below target. Certainly the Council as a whole struggles on these particular indicators. I have been asked before, is there a secret to this? And basically there are no particular or special processes in place to achieve these figures. We do work as a team. We have a can-do culture. Everybody works together. There is no doubt that we're doing more with less people, but because we work and support each other, we're not having to face long absences associated with the work we have to do. So that's a good news story, and it is one of the thermometers that I certainly use regularly to check where we are with our performance and with the workload that we have. Again, over the past several weeks, since the beginning of December, because of the floods, etc., staff have been working quite enormous hours, and it's a credit to them how they cope with that, and it's a credit to them, their commitment to this council.
Thanks for that. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Sorry, Jim, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I forgot this one. This one isn't a question, it's actually congratulations to Alistair and his staff. Page 108, percentage of members' inquiries dealt with through the EMES. It just goes to show you when you have got a service committee or a service that is actually effectively dealing with EMES, we can actually exceed the targets that we set for ourselves. And it's certainly the experience I have putting in EMES is that this is one of the better ones that you get replies from.
Okay, members, can we turn to the recommendations? Okay, I think we've reviewed the 6-month summary of performance in 2.1 and also reviewed 2.2. We've scrutinised the exception report and we're being asked to agree the proposed amendments to the performance information at Appendix 4. Are members happy to agree these recommendations? And can I also, I think, echo Jim's thanks to all the staff. I know that they've been working under really challenging circumstances in recent weeks, but they also continue to have that commitment all year round. And I think this report summarises the excellent work that's going on in the department. Of course, the target next time is to have no red ones, of course, Alistair. I'm sure we'll achieve that. But I think we pass on our thanks to the staff for the excellent performance in the last 6 months. Alistair?
I take it, sir, you intend to minute that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Grateful, Chair.
Okay, members, can we turn now to item number 8? Okay, this is a further report on supplementary guidance for the local development plan, further guidance on developer contributions to be issued for public consultation, as well as agreement on the Crichton Development Master Plan. I don't think I have to declare an interest, although the photograph on the front of the developer contributions is a little play part. My 2-year-old plays it just round the corner from my house, but I don't think that means I've got to declare any interest. Can I ask the Director if there's anything to add to the report before us?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can I open it up to members' questions? Ian?
Just as the first one, I just went to the... Find where I am. I think it's in regards to the education. I'm just curious how the education formula and it relates to the appendix, how that's at. I couldn't really work that one out properly. There's a formula there that shows it's quite complicated as you read through it. It seems quite complicated anyways. But just how does that apply? Because to the actual formula when you see it, because some obviously it says it's unlikely that there'd be a fee, and others within the same catchment area to some academies or secondaries, I should say, there seems to be a fee, would be a charge. And does that actually, is that when it says, say for instance, I'm looking at page 135 at the top of that appendix, which is Appendix 1, top of that table, and academy, it says likely to be 3762. I take it is that a contribution per dwelling being built in within that housing market area? What does that actually mean, please? And I do see it's for guidance only, and it states that, but it's just to get an understanding.
I think that's the key thing. This is a result of quite a lot of ongoing work that we've been doing with the Education Service. And we will be consulting with the Education Service as part of the 6-week consultation process that we're about to undertake on this. So this is very much a work in progress at the moment. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the actual individual figures. This is where we are at the moment in terms of those discussions with education. But yes, that figure would be a contribution that would be charged to developers per unit within that school catchment area in order to contribute to increasing the capacity of the local school provision where there is evidence to show and to demonstrate that the additional demands arising from the development cannot be accommodated within that school catchment without the authority incurring additional expenditure or cost.
Just for clarity, so where it's unlikely, it's because there is unlikely to be any requirement to extend the size of the school based on the likely developments. Is that?
Yes, the likely and unlikely, and again, we would be guided by the Education Service on this. I understand that education are currently carrying out a very thorough review of school capacities, and I think a report has either been or is coming to the Education Committee in relation to this. So we are trying to work very closely with education on that process and on that review But the likely and unlikely is to give an indication at this point in time to developers as to whether or not there is the potential for a contribution to be required within that school catchment. Now that might change as a result of the work that Education Service are doing on reviewing school capacities, but the purpose of the appendix is to try to get that information out into the public domain and to make it a lot more open and transparent than it currently is. The other benefit of doing that is that it gives developers advance warning to expect to have to meet further additional costs associated with their development. What happens at the present time is that when a planning application comes in, we consult with the Education Service, and some of this information comes out on the back of that consultation. The developer therefore only finds out after they've even submitted a planning application. The whole point of this is to try to front load all of that information so that everybody's going into the process with their eyes open and they know what's likely to be expected of them.
Thanks for that explanation. I mean, it does say with it there, if it's below 80% capacity, that's the kind of trigger point, I think is what it says, and therefore it kicks in. But the bit that stood out to me, because look, taking Annan into consideration, you've got 4 primaries as well, and it looks on the face of it that you'd be paying about 2.5k per dwelling towards each primary, plus 3, nearly just short of 4k towards the academy. But that's probably not the case, and that would be ironed out as we go forward. But the other one that stood out to me, isn't in my ward whatsoever, but it's the Sanka Academy, and it reflects on Kirkconnell and Kellerholm, and there's a price attached to that, and that's a place of severe deprivation, you could say, and it's depopulating as well, and you think that would be a burden, Ken, to them. So I'm just raising them points, and just as a general, one in my own ward and one out with, because you think, well, that would obviously it would stop the chance of stimulating development in that area, and it would stop the chance of kind of possibly depopulate the area as well. Wouldn't it be good for economic regeneration either? In regards to, I have got another couple of questions, Chairman, or one in particular. I'll let you go to other people, I'll just find it again, Chairman.
Got somebody else wanting to ask a question in here? We do that indeed. We'll buy you some time. We've got Jim Dempster, then Jim McClung, and then Marion.
Thanks, Chair. The chart as far as Sankers and Kellerholm's concerned is absolutely accurate. Sanker Academy has capacity for about another 300 pupils, and Kellerholm is very, very close to capacity, and so is Sanker in terms of the primary schools. So that's accurate, and I'm more than content with that. The point I would want to raise about developer contributions, and my word, the last couple of social housing developments, there were no contributions made to the play equipment open space because the developer pleaded poverty, for want of a better phraseology. And I know that you have here a requirement for contributions, and then on the page you leave an opportunity for them to appeal against the contribution if the development is seen to be no viable. Now, in my own view, I think at £1,500 a unit is the difference between being viable and no viable. They're flying with their shirt tails, and I think it should only be in extreme cases we remove the requirement for development contributions, because it's sometimes the only way we'll be able, in small communities especially, to upgrade play equipment and open space. So I would hope that there would be a determination by our planning officers to ensure that in every circumstance we get developer contribution and not simply accept a plea on the back of social housing, etc., that contribution should be made. I think in every case it should be, and I'd hope that's what members would support.
I think the principle of developer contributions, when there is pressure put on the infrastructure, is a very valid one, absolutely. We've got Jim McClung and then Marion.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's actually related to the last two, the education and the community facilities. It's the exclusions. Affordable housing provided through a registered social landlord. While I don't have any problem with them being excluded, what about local housing trusts that decide to set up so that they can provide affordable housing for their own village, but they don't want to be a registered social landlord? They are a charitable trust and they build their houses locally for allocation to local people. And also with the community facilities, with previous community facilities that had been provided for that area be taken into account when you were actually calculating whether they would need to contribute towards further community facilities. I'm thinking specifically, I don't want to be parochial as you say, but I'm thinking specifically of Glenluce. They've spent £30,000 putting up play equipment in Glenluce Park and in Raggett Park. Would that be considered as having they've already contributed towards community facilities?
Chair, there would only be a requirement for a developer contribution if there is an identified and evidenced need or shortfall within that community. So in a situation where there has previously been community facilities provided, then it's possible that the assessment that we carry out would reveal that actually there isn't a deficiency, so there is no, this isn't an absolute requirement that would apply in every single situation. It's only where we can evidence that there is a deficiency that building new houses, for example, would only exacerbate the lack of a community facility. So yes, it would be taken into consideration. If there are other models of charitable housing that could fall within the scope of that exemption, then I would encourage people to respond to the public consultation to draw that to our attention so that we can then bring it back to members when we bring this report back to the next meeting, and we can consider any further changes to the draft. Could I just make just a wider point, just picking up on one or two comments that have been made about this whole business about viability? And I think Councillor Dempster in particular was making the point in relation to education facilities. There is a general requirement in terms of the developer contributions policy. If you look at page 132, within the supplementary guidance that addresses the whole issue of development viability. And I think it is recognised that sometimes there is a balance to be struck here between making these requirements on developers to pay for, legitimately to pay for the additional demands that their developments are generating, but also recognising that in some parts, in particular in some parts of Dumfries and Galloway, there are issues around development viability and development economics. And it's a question of getting the balance right so that we don't stifle development by putting forward unrealistic demands, but at the same time recognise that where it's possible to secure developer contributions, then we have to secure them in an open and transparent fashion. So I wouldn't want members to get the impression that we'll just rigidly apply this. We have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, and if a developer is able to evidence, and I think that's the key thing, a developer would have to evidence to us that meeting these requirements would actually mean that the development just wouldn't go ahead. Now, in that situation, yes, we would sit down and have another look at the requirements with the developer so that we can arrive at something that's going to secure a reasonable contribution, but also, at the end of the day, we do want to make sure that development happens. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Is that principle, do you think, explicit enough in the guidance that people are, I mean, because it is obviously, I mean, the principle of receiving contributions is very clear in the supplementary guidance. Is the sort of principle around it, but actually the viability of a development is also a major factor the planning committee will take into account and officers will take into account. Do you think that's something that's explicit enough? I don't know if members have got a view on that or not, but maybe doesn't necessarily come across in the guidance, although I think everybody appreciates that that's a valid point.
I think we do on in that paragraph on page 132. It does state that if the provision of developer contributions makes a scheme financially unviable, the developer will be required to provide a full development appraisal, demonstrating the negative impact the contribution has upon the proposal, where it's considered that it's so great that the proposal would otherwise not take place, then we will negotiate with the developer. So I think it is captured in the current wording, Chair.
Members happy that, I think it's on the top left-hand corner of page 132. I mean, it comes back to the point that Ian made. Members happy that that's explicit enough. Okay, I have Marion.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just ask on page 137, you've got Belmont School as it's getting a contribution. Can I just ask, is the parking and the road leading into Belmont School being taken into consideration if there's going to be an expansion to the school? And if not, can I ask that you do consider it, because the roads are really suffering quite badly, because I think Belmont School at the moment is actually at its capacity, and it's at the moment I think it's 25 parking spaces for 300 plus cars that come on a daily basis, 2 or 3 times a day, and the roads are really suffering, and the residents are struggling to get potholes covered, and it's due to the extra traffic we've got because it comes to a dead end where the turn. Can I ask that if he's only considering it, could you please consider that before anything is done at Belmont School?
Chair, I think it's important to say that this is not about addressing existing issues with the operation of the school, which should be taken up directly with the education service. This is about trying to ensure that if there is future development within that school catchment area, that we get sufficient contribution from the developer to be able to address any capacity issues in the school. As part of addressing any capacity issue in the school, if an expansion of the school is needed, then that would also have to look at parking provision and access and so on. But I have to emphasise it's not a way of addressing any current operational difficulties that the school generates.
You've actually covered it, Chair. Steve's comments were helpful, not to say reassuring, and I think it will benefit all concerned if they are incorporated, as you've suggested, into the formal guidance. So I'm well content with that, Chair. Thank you.
Just again, to going along with the points you made earlier in regards to the development viability, and I think Steve outlined that very well. I mean, there's currently, in my ward, I know Steve's aware of it, but there's a developer, they've front-loaded their contribution up to the tune of over £600,000 at the moment, and they still haven't got one unit built as of yet. So it's just getting an understanding of how this applies to each individual. It states in the very last paragraph, so to speak, or sentence, plan permission for all developments will be assessed individually. And there is definitely a need and a desire for, I think, from both developers and the council that there should be a contribution where it's needed. I'd like to make sure that was emphasised and it was consistent across the council, that actual development viability, so that it's clear then thereafter that it will be applied in a good and proper way.
Craig.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate at this stage it's just going out for consultation and it is a supplementary guidance. But I was just wondering, Steve, once the document has gone through the process and we eventually adopt it, will that improve the council's legal status when it imposes conditions through the planning committee? Because I'm sure that we've all had it in cases before where developer contribution has been a condition of a planning application, and that has been agreed by the committee. But subsequently, developers have challenged that condition and therefore have it removed. So will this document therefore help the legal status of the planning committee when it's making those decisions?
Chair, it helps the status in that for the first time it makes this part of our adopted development plan, which is the starting point for all decision making on planning applications. I think the situation, the sorts of situation that you're referring to, where developers subsequently come back, which they're entitled to do, developers are entitled to put applications in seeking to either remove or vary previous planning conditions that were imposed by committee. That's then a matter for the committee to weigh that up in each individual case. I don't think it's possible to make a generalised statement on that, other than having it in the supplementary guidance, having the supplementary guidance adopted does increase its status.
Okay, members, can we turn to the recommendations? Okay, are members happy to agree to 2.1? Sorry.
With the amendment that you've already indicated, sir?
Yeah, I think it wasn't as much an amendment. I'll get members' guidance, but I was making the point that do members think that the document covers the issue of development viability enough? And I think if you look at the top of page 132, top left-hand corner, there's sort of 3 paragraphs in there on development viability that Steve referred to, and it was just, do members think that that's explicit enough within the document? Is that?
I would prefer, if at all possible, sir, maybe sort of slight alteration to bring in, or to make it clear. Steve's, as I've said, helpful, not to say reassuring comments. But as I say, I'm not going to divide over it. But that'd be my own personal feeling. That I thought that having read it and having listened to what Steve said, I think it could possibly do with maybe a wee bit more clarification along the lines of his comments. But as I've said, I'm certainly not going to divide on it.
We're happy to leave that with officers to look at the wording, just without it obviously come back to committee for then consultation, because we will get a final look at the document before we agree anyway. Happy to do that. Okay. Are we happy to agree 2.3, which is obviously the current development framework? The other document that's in there, that's obviously been out to consultation. There's a number of comments there, and I think they've been addressed, and it's obviously for members to agree that master plan. Okay. Happy to agree 2.4, which we've done, obviously. 2.5, agreed, and 2.6, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, members, can we turn to item number 9, which is the independent review of the planning system. The reports obviously has an outline response to the review. There was a very, very tight deadline placed on this review by the Scottish Government. I know that in meetings I was at with COSLA, a lot of councils expressed concern at the short time scale, but I think if we do wish to, this is obviously a draft response that's gone in, but if we do wish to amend the response, we're able to do so and still respond to the consultation despite the tight time scale. Can I ask the Director if there's anything he wishes to add to the report before members?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can I open it up to any members' questions? Alistair?
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. It's the third bullet points, or paragraph 6 on page 167. Talks about fees and charges for providing advice, assessing and determining development proposals. Now, I have no problems with that, Chair. It's it's the point about fees and charges for providing advice. I take it when we do provide advice at the moment, since we don't charge for it, Chair, it's made clear that it's on a without liability basis. And presumably, of course, if we're moving into the position of charging for it, which I feel that we should be doing, Chair, that it will impose a more onerous legal obligation on not only this council, but on all councils as planning authorities. That's really the thrust of my question, sir.
Chair, certainly the notion of charging for advice, and specifically charging for pre-application advice, is something which is now becoming much more widespread. A number of authorities have already introduced charging regimes where they charge a proportion of what a full planning fee would be in order to receive pre-application information from the planning authority in a written form. We have in recent years formalised our approach to pre-application advice to agents, in that we now do provide a written response to each and every inquiry. The next stage, and we are actively considering this as part of looking at different ways in which, frankly, we can continue to generate more and more income to offset some of the financial pressures we have, is to actually start charging for all of that advice. and we would be proposing to bring forward proposals as part of the budget review process on that front. It doesn't change the status and nature of that advice in that it's given in order to provide potential applicants with, it still remains informal advice. It doesn't bind or commit the authority to any particular decision, and I think that's the key thing. It's then a matter for the applicant to assess whether they want to take cognizance of that advice and whether they want to proceed and put an application in. But it would still be on the basis that it doesn't bind or commit the authority to any particular final decision, and that's an important point to emphasise. The introduction of a charging regime doesn't change that at all.
Grateful for the response, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Ian Crothers and Jim Dempster.
Thanks, Chairman. It was the same point as Alice was bringing up, but another point as well, just in regards to that bullet point. And I've been lobbied by developers since 2007-8, somewhere about there, when they said they'd be more than happy to pay a fee, certainly for pre-application advice, but it's the quality of service, and I think that's the point. Probably, if it ever gets to that stage in time, I'll come back at that point, but look for an improved service when it comes to that pre-advice. But we're more than happy to pay for it. I don't think there's any I've not picked up any reserves there at all from developers. In regards to bullet point, bottom of page 166, bullet point 5, paragraph 5, the first bullet point, I just wondered, have we done any work in regards to what an average local householder application would cost, and if we were to get full recovery of fees, how much would that uplift be? Have we got any idea, even just as a kind of guesstimate? If not, maybe we'll come back to that at a different time as it moves forward. Because I think, generally, any member sitting on the table would say, absolutely right, we should be recovering full cost for planning applications. But when you look, I just wondered what the actual figures would be. What is an average application fee, and how much would that lift by?
I do have that information, Chair, but I don't have it to hand. I can certainly circulate that, and it's not a guesstimate. It's actually based on an exercise that we did last year over the course of a month, where we recorded every single minute of planning officers' time spent on different applications as part of a national piece of work that was carried out between HOPS and the Improvement Service. So we absolutely know how much it costs us to process an application for a householder development. In general terms, across the board, there is 63% cost recovery across the whole of Scotland at the moment. Certainly, that's what that exercise revealed. We were slightly better than that, and some authorities were slightly worse than that. But that was the average figure, 63%. So authorities are generally subsidising the development management service to the tune of approximately 27% of its cost. And I think there is a willingness on the part of the Minister, and this has been communicated very recently, there is a willingness to move towards, and a recognition that we need to move towards 100% cost recovery by restructuring nationally the fees and charges.
Thanks, Chair. It's about public engagement and about, it's on page 172. Do we need to change the system to ensure everyone has a fair hearing and planning decision making? Is it possible to improve public perception of the planning system? Absolutely, and I'll give you an example. I'm trying to deal with an issue now where BT have dumped a green cabinet the size of that unit in front of you, right in the middle of a conservation area, using permitted development rights. The community are up in arms about it, and there's nothing we can do. I've spoken to our planning officers, and they suggested to BT that it wasn't the best place to put that unit, and the response was, well, please yourselves, maybe not in that fashion. But unless the public are actually engaged with and listened to, we're wasting our time and we're taking advantage of. And that's this, I tell you this because this is not just about Sanker. This will happen in every town and village across the region. These huge green cabinets are appearing in most unacceptable locations, with situations where tenants can't put Plastic windows in place of wooden ones, although you can't tell the difference, and yet things the size of a garden shed are appearing in every street in towns and villages across the region. Something wrong with that. So, aye, it is about public engagement. It's also about us having a fair hearing and not being abused by utility companies. That's what's happening currently. And I think that's something we definitely need to address when we're dealing with consultation arrangements and processes such as this. And apparently, the Scottish Government removed the need for an application to be submitted to the Council where there's conservation area status in place. Something that's absolutely wrong. But it's a region-wide thing and something we need to look at, Chair.
A valid point. I think particularly when not one but maybe three suddenly appear right in the heart of a conservation area outside a building. So I think it's got a valid point. Ronnie Ogilvie.
If I could turn to page 68, Chair, at the very top, it's under the leadership and resourcing and skills part. It says training for elected members taking part in the decision making on development proposals should be prescriptive and structured in a manner similar to the quasi-judicial process, like the licensing boards. I just wondered what that would look like in effect, because a lot of people on the planning committee have been there for many years. And so I just wondered what prescriptive and structured training we would be receiving.
I think, Chair, this was a general point. Bear in mind, this is a national review. So what we're saying is that there should be a consistent approach adopted across all planning authorities to make sure that there is a commitment to having a full structured development and training programme for members participating, particularly in committees that are deciding on planning applications, in the same way that there is a requirement for members of licensing boards to receive that type of training. At the moment, it's very hit or miss whether authorities do or don't provide such training. So this isn't necessarily something that's specific to us. It's more of a general comment saying actually we should be rolling this out across consistently across all planning authorities, and if necessary, it needs to be written into the regulations somewhere that it is actually a requirement for planning authorities to provide members with such support.
Yeah.
I just wonder what that would look like, because I know from licensing, for liquor licensing, you have to sit an exam type thing and you get a certificate to say that you're qualified. Planning's quite an in-depth thing, you know. We rely on you to keep us right, you know. So I just wondered if we all sit this exam or some sort of criteria to pass to be of an acceptable standard to meet the criteria, and none of us pass it, then you might not have a planning committee. That's just a worry I have.
Well, that's not a worry I have. I'm sure you'll all pass whatever standard is set. At the moment, there is no clear proposal in terms of how this would be structured. I think this is just a general point that actually we need to be a lot more consistent in our approach to this across all planning authorities.
One or two amateurs as well, Ronnie, isn't there? Okay, members, can we turn to the recommendations on page 163? Members happy to agree to the submission we made? Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, thanks, Steve. Can we turn to item number 10? Which is to update members on a number of amendments to the Dumfries and Galloway Core Path Plan. Can I ask the Director if there's anything he wishes to add to the report before members?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can I open it up to any members' questions? Members happy to. I think most of the amendments are obviously around just tweaking the previous document. I don't think there's anything in there that jumps out as being a concern to anyone, no? Okay, Finlay.
Is there any revenue implications to these changes?
Thank you, Chair. No, there's no revenue implications to the changes. In fact, it reduces some of the revenue burden.
Okay, members, can we turn to item number 11, which is Upper Nithsdale Regeneration Plan. This is obviously a summary of the plan and ask members to agree to allocate funding towards a number of the priority projects. Can I ask the Director if there's anything he wishes to add to the report before members?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair, just to say that there will be a short presentation on the report itself, if members are agreeable. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members happy with that? Yep. Okay. Over to you and then Jason.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a very brief presentation just to introduce the fairly detailed report. I think I was going for record length of appendices on this report today. The project approach was very much about bringing together quite a lot of work that had previously been done in the community around regeneration priorities. And we worked very closely with CLD and the Coalfields Regeneration Trust to bring all of the previous elements of work that have been done and coordinate those into a coherent strategic plan. We held a design charrette over a process of, well, over the course of a week, and we also had a separate session in One Lock Head to bring together elements of those community priorities that had also been worked on in a very detailed way with the Coalfields Regeneration Trust over the last couple of years. The work that we did throughout the charrette brought together 4 main cross-cutting themes that you can see up there: sustainable economic growth, urban place and quality, housing and infrastructure, and cultural and civic life. And all of those components have actually fed together into this report to form the overall regeneration plan. These are just some of the headline investment figures that came out of that piece of work that go together to formulate the overall strategic approach. Looking at regeneration investment, but excluding specifically housing, but also looking at sustainable economic growth, looking at the value that we can derive out of improving the quality of place in Upper Nithsdale, looking at investing in community infrastructure, and also maximising the potential to improve cultural and civic life. The priority projects that came out of the work actually were considered by the area committee in December, and they agreed that the projects that came out of the work around the welcome gateways, which is a kind of a continuation of a theme that we have developed around some of our other regeneration projects in Gretna and also in Lockerbie, and they've been very successful. So there is certainly an agreement to continue that theme of projects in Upper Nithsdale for all of the key towns. Looking at key public realm improvement projects in Sanker and Kirkconnell, and looking at also at developing the business plan for an Upper Nithsdale Enterprise Centre in Kellerholme, which will look to draw together and maximise economic and employment opportunities across the area, not just in Kellerholme, but across the area. The project programme, we're pretty much on with this now. The overall conclusion of the work went to the area community meeting on the 4th of November. That was followed up by the business meeting in early December. We're considering the results of that and the conclusion and recommendations from those committees. And what we're then looking to do is to move forward with the projects that we can get on the ground fairly quickly, which will be the gateway projects, and then working fairly intensively to develop the funding business case for the Enterprise Centre in Kellerholme. Very happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
Very much for that, Jason. Can I open it up to members' questions? You want to talk about this topic, Jim? No?
Ever so briefly. Can I first of all apologise to members and staff? I turned the heating down because it's difficult for us here to hear what's being said, the noise of this fan behind us. So apologies to those that are feeling the call, but it's so that we could hear what was being said. No, I just want to commend you and his team for the work they've done. There's been a huge amount of work going in here. Community are enthused by it. And as a throwaway line, I hope it's just a starting point and that we go on to the phase 2 and phase 3 and develop business units, engage further with the communities, etc., etc. But I'm happy to endorse what's been proposed and thank the staff for the work they've done.
Jim, I'd certainly echo those sentiments. Members, any other questions? Can I just ask, do you want to say something about where we're looking for match funding? Obviously, the Enterprise Centre is a proposed £400,000 investment from the council, but obviously we're looking to bring in even further investment. What sort of areas are we looking to source that funding from?
There have been various funding streams from Scottish Government over the recent years, Chair. I think perhaps most notably Regeneration Capital Grant funding that's been made available, and we're going to be looking to bring in match funding from those sources from a central pot.
Okay, no other questions from members? Okay, sorry, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm glad to see that there's actual plans for the Upper Nithsdale area as well. 3.12, it gives a list of the proposed actions and the cost of that is going to be. However, in the commentary under 3.12, it says that we allocated 750 across 2 financial years, 14 to 17. I take it that's 15 to 17, because 14 to 17 would be 3. And it says 750,000. Yet when you look at page 377, which gives what we're going to be, I take it, spending in 16-17 under the year 2016, the total at the bottom of that comes to 792. Can somebody explain where the difference is?
We'll need to get back to you on the detail of that.
I'm assuming it's the fact that not all of it's going to come out of this capital budget. I think community transport, for example, that wouldn't come out of the capital budget, I would have thought. I think there's 750,000 coming out of the capital budget, but there'll obviously be expenditure on other areas that don't come out of the capital budget. Any other members' questions? Okay, can we turn to the recommendations? Go back several hundred pages. Okay. Page 199 for members. Are members happy to note 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4? Are we happy to agree the plan at Appendix 6 and to approve the projects at 3.1? Okay, thank you very much for that, members. Okay, can we turn to item number 12? I'm even going to try and pronounce that word that I keep getting wrong at South of Scotland Alliance meetings. But this is obviously to provide members with background information to the NUTS 2 review being carried out by the Scottish Government at the moment and seeks to get agreement for members to respond to the consultation. I have to say this is something the South of Scotland Alliance have been pushing for some time, which is effectively to create a 5th area and covering the south of Scotland. I have to commend the significant work the South of Scotland Alliance have done on this project and the work the officers have done to actually get to a stage where the proposal was contained within the Scottish Government's consultation document. I think it's a major achievement. We've got to the place where we are. Previous attempts to rewrite these boundaries haven't been successful, but we've made significant progress in achieving it this time, and it has the potential to bring in significant additional funding from Europe to this part of Scotland. So I think it's excellent that we're actually at this particular stage. I think, though, it does highlight a point that I've raised at South of Scotland Alliance meetings, that maybe we don't actually notify members enough about the various decisions that are taken at the Alliance meetings and also the work the Alliance are actually undertaking. It's not only the NUTS 2 area that we've been looking at. We've been looking at issues around training for employment. We've been looking at a new competitive strategy, issues around promoting support to make sure that we deliver on 100% broadband coverage, not just the 95% that's on target at present, and also improve mobile phone connectivity. And we've also obviously got the the South of Scotland Rural Regional Economic Development Programme. So a lot of work takes place through the Alliance, and I don't think we keep members sufficiently up to date. What we asked recently was for a short summary, instead of bombarding members with the papers for South of Scotland Alliance meetings. What we asked for was maybe a short report to come at the end of each meeting of the South of Scotland Alliance to give you a summary of the decisions that have been taken and the progress that's happening. So if members are happy, I'll ensure that gets circulated. The last meeting was in November. I'll get the notes circulated to members highlighting the work that's taking place at the moment, and likewise the work that's going to take place as a result of the meetings that we have this year, including a meeting with the Finance Secretary, Deputy First Minister, on the 8th of February to highlight some of these issues. So if members are happy with that, I'll make sure that gets circulated at the end of each South of Scotland Alliance meeting. I think this is evidence that the Alliance is certainly making progress in a number of areas. Can I ask the Director if there's anything he wishes to add to the report before members?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, can I open it up to members' questions? Alistair and then Ian.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. Totally supportive of your comments. I may also say I would commend unreservedly the authors of this report, both you and Donna. I've always found this a complex, not to say opaque, subject until I've read until having read the report. Normally, at the conclusion of meetings like this, I tend to bin all of my papers, but this is one, and along with the flood report, that I would certainly intend to keep for future reference. And as far as I'm concerned, sir, it's really a no-brainer. The question is, how at the end of the day do we develop it with a view to achieving success ultimately where it matters, i.e. in the European Union. We're back to lobbying again, perhaps, Chair. I'd be interested to hear your views and colleagues' views on that aspect of it.
I think that's a valid point. We held a briefing of South of Scotland MSPs recently in the Scottish Parliament to brief them on this and the rest of the work of the Alliance, and we sought their support as well. And I know that the Alliance are contacting MSPs to ask them to respond to the consultation to make sure they support the recommendation. We also held a meeting with the three MPs that cover the South of Scotland, Callum Kerr, David Mundell and Richard Atlas. We had a meeting with them to seek their support for the consultation as well. And again, we're going back to them to urge them to make sure they respond positively to the consultation. It came up at the meeting I attended, Development Subcommittee in COSLA recently, and I moved that COSLA support the recommendation, and was seconded by my colleague from the Scottish Border. So COSLA have agreed also to support the recommendation and to put a submission in to the Scottish Government. So once we hopefully will get a positive outcome from the Scottish Government's consultation, the next stage then is to make sure we lobby the UK Government to take it to the next stage, and then obviously until we ultimately get a decision. I think it's a slow burner is probably the best way to describe it, but I think we're making progress. But the issue around lobbying is absolutely crucial, and it's certainly on the radar of the Alliance.
Can I say, Chair, it's gratifying to hear your comments. Thank you.
Okay, any other members? Oh, sorry, Ian, sorry, apologies.
Thanks, Chair. Just same as Alistair, very welcome this report, and grateful to the authors for the quality. Just a couple of questions. I noticed in 3.1.5 it mentions that previous representations were made that were unsuccessful due to not having fulfilled the requirements of the EU. Can you tell me what's different now with where we are now compared to the initial? When did we initially make applications for this? And finally, can you maybe give us some indication, or do we have any indication of what level of funding this is likely to attract?
I think just in the first point, the previous application that went in was just a boundary based around the Scottish borders in Dumfries and Galloway. I think it was some time ago, certainly way before my time. That was the original sort of proposal to the previous discussion around the boundaries, and obviously because it was only the two local authority areas, it didn't meet the population criteria. The difference with this application is it not only covers Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders, it covers East, North, South Ayrshire and also South Lanarkshire. Now I think one of the achievements of actually getting to where we are is actually bringing those other local authorities on board, because it's obviously a powerful case for Scottish borders and Dumfries and Galloway to say we shouldn't necessarily be linked with the west of Scotland and Glasgow when it comes to these boundaries, but to actually convince North Ayrshire and South Lanarkshire to actually come on board with that argument, or at the very least not oppose that argument, is actually quite a major step forward, and I think it shows where we are in terms of the work that's been done by officers. So that the actual combination of authorities now not only meets the population criteria, but it obviously gives a very, very powerful case that's made in the paper as to how we could benefit from significant funding, because actually it does illustrate we have major issues around low pay, etc., within this part of Scotland. I can't remember the timeline on that, Ewan. It was some time ago. It was obviously when we developed the previous ones. I don't know if Donna knows when it was. It's way before my time, anyway.
Yeah, the previous work done was 6, 7, 8 years ago. It was significant timescale. In terms of moving this forward, we're talking about the future European programmes. So they're set at the moment till 2020. So any change in funding would be after that point. We haven't put a figure in here, but we have done some research on this, and I can come back to you with an example of what that might look like at the moment. But obviously that depends on the level of European funding that's available with the EU at the time. But what I would say is the strength in this paper, I think, is that it not only would represent an increase in the south of Scotland, but also Scotland as a whole. But happy to come back to members with some figures on that, what that would look like at the moment.
Got Ronnie Ogilvie and then Jim McClung.
Thanks, Chair. I think you've answered part of my question. I was going to raise the proposed Nuts 2, and it's on page 443. And you mentioned the 3 Ayrshires and South Lanarkshire. I know this South of Scotland Alliance is basically the borders and yourselves. I just wondered what contact with the local authorities is going forward. Would that become part of the alliance because working together for this, trying to achieve the Nuts 2, or I know you mentioned the MSPs and MPs, and I just wondered, that's fine, but at the local government level, what contacts we're making so that you get buy-in from them? Because they might not want to move away from the Glasgows and that.
I think it should be stressed that what this is a proposal around European funding. It's not a proposal to expand the South of Scotland Alliance to include those local authority areas. But campaigning purposes, I don't think there's no plan to expand the South of Scotland Alliance as such, but certainly we're working with other local authorities to make sure they put in positive responses to the consultation, or at the very least they don't oppose the recommendation within the consultation. Okay, I've got Jim and then Ian.
It's just the details that's in 3.13, and what Ewan's just said, it says that the current review will come into force on the 1st of January 2018, but will not impact on the allocation of structural funds until 2026. I thought I heard Ewan say that it would be 2020. Is it 2020 or 2026?
The proposal that's on the table at the moment by the government is that the structural funds, the allocation of structural funds will come into play in 2026 if this comes. But part of the point that we would be making is that there is a new programme for 2020 that we would want to pull it forward, and that would be part of the work that we would be doing.
Actually, just a welcome report. It is first class. I would certainly have it commended. Appreciate and would fully accept what your recommendations were to have a briefing back to this committee after each South of Scotland Alliance meeting, because our group hasn't got any representation in that, so we are kept out of the loop. And my question was in particular regards to that 2026 deadline, but that's been, if we're getting further information back, I think you and Sam will get a further report in regards to that, more clarity in regards to the financial benefit to Dumfries and Galloway in particular, how we would see that coming forward over the years, whether it's 4 years away or 10 years away, or maybe both, see what that actual, because that's what I couldn't see within the appendix. What is the actual financial benefit? It certainly looks to be benefits because we moved to Nuts 2, but I couldn't put a figure on that, so that would be appreciated.
I think Ian's gave a commitment to circulate to members the research that's been done around that particular, so I'll make sure that happens. Brian?
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to endorse the previous positive comments that have been made regarding this. Was in the early stages involved in discussions around this broadening out of interest. My question is not by any means to take away from any of the content. I'm interested, however, in what benefit or what involvement we might be continuing in respect of the Interreg 5 and whether this council will have any presence at the forthcoming launch in Belfast and how those two might interface for the future benefit of the economy of Dumfries and Galloway.
In terms of Interreg, we're constantly looking at opportunities for funding. Certainly I'm involved in one of the programme management committees for Interreg in terms of the dispersing the funding, but certainly our teams, particularly around looking at the sort of environmental types of projects we can bring forward, or looking at transportation side of things, and particularly potentially capital investment linked to particularly the west of the region, which is an eligible area. We're certainly looking at every opportunity. So I can assure you, Interreg is something we are very acutely aware of in terms of a potential funding stream for many projects.
Is that recognised, sorry, Chair, is that recognised insofar as I know that Brussels look to 3 countries being in partnership, and the island of Ireland, south and north, and ourselves have, I would suggest, held quite a good position there that the region has not hitherto capitalised on as it might, and how we might take that forward in collaboration with the other aspects that are contained within this paper. It's the interface between the two and how the profile of this region and the economy might benefit off the back of that.
Certainly I see a number of proposals coming forward from other countries and looking for partners. And I think we take a view on that as to whether that fits with our business plans and our resource. But I think probably the way to answer your question is that Scotland Europa is an organisation that is charged on a Scotland-wide basis of making these connections, and we're a member of Scotland Europa and we work very closely with them. So we have the right contacts, so when calls for funding streams do come out, we're part of that loop and we're able to make the connections that way.
My concern has been that historically it's not necessarily been the case that the relevant information has been passed on, and therefore the opportunity to capitalise hasn't presented in a timely manner. So I hope that we can address that in the future.
Can we move to the recommendation? Are members happy to agree the response? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, I'm going to propose we take a short break to allow you to consider the report on flooding events, and 25 minutes, okay? Back here at past. Yeah, okay, thanks very much. Next item on the agenda is the report on the December 2015 flooding events. Can I ask the Director if there's anything to add to the report before members?
Chair, my colleague Stephen Herriot has something just to add. Thank you.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Just some additional information in addition to the report that's in front of you. The report has in one of the appendices the pro forma for the flood grant application scheme, and just to say that that went live on the Council's website yesterday. It's the first news item on the website, and if you click on the link, it comes up with the details for businesses and for households and for community properties that were inundated on how to apply for and draw down the £1,500 grant. There's also the phone number there. There's a dedicated number, 030 33 33 009, which is a variation of the kind of general council number. And we just encourage members to share that information with those communities that were affected. We are following up the properties that we know that were inundated. We're following up the residential properties, and the contacts that were made in Ewan's team last week with the businesses have been followed up as well. And we have about 25 applications we're getting processed and starting to go into the system. Yesterday, we've had another 25 come through the email system this morning, and following visits by officers yesterday to Carsfairn, there's another 10 applications from Carsfairn being checked over today and processed to go through finance so that they can go through the BACS payment system. Thanks.
So get my microphone working. Can I open it up to Brian?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points I'd like clarification on. It's not only online that members of the public will be able to make these applications. I seek that assurance. But I would also like to ask from a governance standpoint, where in the multi-member ward a member might make application or request of officers, and the officer responds to all members of the ward in reply to that request. On numerous occasions, it's been stated during these events that officers have been in touch with communities. I wonder what the difference is for the elected member when communications take place between officer and communities, why elected members are not copied in to those communications. And the fact that that has not happened in my experience and has met with a negative response with each member that I have asked the same question of, why has that not happened, and can that not be standard practice in the future so that elected members are in the loop at all times with regard all of these matters that are relevant to the elected member and their responsibilities in their wards? I was in the island of New Galloway during this event and could not access the rest of my ward due to the flooding, and therefore was very much left in a high degree of ignorance as to what was happening, even in close proximity to me, because of the lack of communication. But I seek clarification around that level of communication being facilitated. Can't happen now, but at least in the future. Thank you.
I don't know about other members, but did all members receive the situation reports that were issued by email on an almost daily basis? So that obviously covered the council's responses. Is there particular information that's not in the situation reports you think should be in future reports? I thought that was pretty comprehensive and it explained exactly what the response was at the time.
Thanks, Chair. I did respond to the first press release that came out in respect of the 713, for example, being shut north of Castle Douglas. North of Castle Douglas happened to be, at that point in time, Cosfern, which is 30-something miles north of Castle Douglas. It raised more questions than answers. That's another issue, however. But the situation reports that came out were generic rather than specific to wards. If officers are in contact with communities or constituents within the respective ward, I believe it's appropriate for the respective elected members to be copied in to the responses that those constituents are receiving, by virtue of the fact that the officer needs the fullest information to respond, so also does the elected member.
I think it's getting the balance right. If an individual constituent contacts the council with any issue, it's not common practice to copy the councillors in, and I don't, we can't distinguish between one issue and another issue, whether it's education, social work, or anything else, because obviously they're important to everybody. But I think if there's a general trend, if you like, if there's a particular general issue coming up, maybe that's something that should be incorporated into some sort of situation reports. Notwithstanding, of course, that I attended a number of briefings and meetings in the emergency bunker during the course of both storms, and I have to say there was a lot of staff working their absolute socks off with bags under their eyes, all sorts of hours in order to deliver the response. And I wouldn't like to add any additional burdens to staff when actually the priority for them is to help people in their communities, not necessarily respond to councillors. But obviously I think it is important to make sure that we get as much information as possible. So I think that's something that people will take on board to actually look. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I did preface my opening remarks with regard to the specific events that take place and such events that may take place in the future.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the situation reports, there was 4 or 5 went out a day, copied into elected members. I mean, accuracy is important, and you know, we work with the data that we've got at that time and try and update that as the situation reports move forward. So certainly welcome any sort of feedback in terms of accuracy. We are relying on numerous kind of data sources just to pull together a full picture across the region, as we were doing the week just running up to the end of the year. The question at the start, Councillor Collins, it's not an online-only application. The application for the grant award is not only online, which was the question I think you put at the start. We can make hard copies of that available, and in some cases we're actually sitting down with people and filling those forms out, particularly on the business side where we already have the information from the visits that was completed last week.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth highlighting. Officers have actually individually met with over 100 individual businesses over the last week, and obviously carrying forms with them to make sure that people can apply for these things. Obviously, by definition, if your business has been underwater, you might not necessarily have online access. So that's actually been taking place. There's a pile of work taking place of officers actually physically meeting with businesses and households and actually effectively completing the forms with them. So it's not just online response. Okay, I've got Finlay next, then Jim Dempster, then Alistair Geddes.
Thanks, Chair. Just want to start by thanking the council officers for the hard work they've done over both floods, particularly between New Year and now, where in particular the residents of Carsfairn have been hit with flooding 3 times in the last 2 years, with 29 properties flooded. There was a fantastic resilience committee up there that did a lot of work, but yesterday the intervention by various departments with the council was very welcomed, and a potentially difficult emergency meeting last night in Carsfairn went very smoothly. No small part to the work that the council officers have done by knocking on doors and making sure everybody was aware of the support that was available. There's obviously 1 or 2 issues that have been raised, including just the resilience of power supplies, mobile phone masts, which have caused real problems. And I know certainly still in Carsfairn there's no mobile phone signal, and with a lot of residents still not able to return to their home, they've got no way of communicating with their insurance companies and whatever. So we maybe need to look at how some of these installations, not just mobile, in Newton Stewart, where the telephone system, the power was off because of water inundation. Issues like road closures, many communities want to get more involved with being able to help out the roads department, particularly again in the Glen Kens, where it was almost impossible to travel from Castle Douglas to Carsfairn without there being 4 or 5 major flooding incidents, with communities really keen to close the roads off. One incident, a vehicle driving through the main street in Carsfairn actually probably caused more flooding as the result of the bow wave that it created than the natural flooding itself, and I know the police are looking into that. On the back of what we've got here, I think it's really important that we make decisions today to get some time scales in place to ensure communities such as Carsfairn that have already got flood research done by various companies, and a decision was taken in July to progress those, and for whatever reason the draft reports have sat gathering dust, and I think it's now a time to show our commitment to these rural communities and actually get some timescales and funding in place to explore and progress the flood prevention schemes in these areas.
Okay, I've got Jim Dempster.
Thanks, Chair. Probably echoing what Finlay said. Councillor Dykes and I attended a public meeting in Money Ive last night with the Community Council, and it was how they could organise themselves in a self-help group to deal with flooding, with future flooding issues. While I was there, a social work member of staff arrived, did some advice and was going door to door, which is absolutely commendable, and that's what we should be doing. I think the point I would make is this village was marooned. They felt and feel very, very vulnerable, and they're not featured within this document anywhere as one of the most affected communities, and yet they very much were. The same as the case for Kirkconnell to a degree. I was under the impression we had carried out a flood risk study in Kirkconnell. They flooded again quite considerably during the most recent incident. And there's a more localised bit of flooding in Sanker, and obviously I wouldn't expect that to feature here. But I do hope that the communities that are no featured here will be visited, seen, a flood risk management scheme will be developed. There's no in there in conjunction with the communities, and that might be reported at a later date on the sort of lower scale, if you like, flooding, but still severely impacting on the communities that are dotted around the region that have been affected. Money I've most certainly very badly affected, and I would hope that we would make sure that that community is engaged with to offer them support and advice, as the same in Kirkconnell and Sanker in due course. But happy to have the report for what it is. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Jim. I think 3.24 certainly covers the impact of the flood on Money Ive. There's quite a bit of detail there, and the fact that around a dozen properties in Money Ive were flooded, and obviously George Hotel remains closed due to flood damage. But I think the point about, as we're going forward, and there'll be a report will come before committee in March, I think, in terms of taking forward the local flood management plan, obviously making sure that Money Ive and what we're going to propose there is obviously featured within that. It's obviously going to be crucial.
Delighted with that, Chair, and the same for Kirkconnell. That was quite, and it's not the first time. It's 2 or 3 incidents now.
Okay, Stephen, do you want to come in and that
Just a bit more clarification, Chair, thanks. Under section 3.37, we actually list the actions that were agreed at committee back in July 2015 that we would give more detail on, but effectively we're asking members in March to sign up to those, and that includes the delivery of a flood study for Money Ive, and Kirkconnell's mentioned there as well.
Delighted to hear it. Thanks for that, Chair.
Okay, Alistair, and then Jim.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. I have to say, sir, that I, and I'm sure in common with other members, particularly members of those areas which experienced flooding, I found this a distressing experience. And I would pay unstinting tribute not only to Alistair Speedy and his staff, but to all the council staff who have been actively involved in this. But as far as I'm concerned, Chair, if this issue proves anything, and I took the opportunity when the leader was through in Newton Stewart on the day to make the point to him, as well as to other distinguished visitors, i.e. the First Minister and the Environment Minister, that if this, to me, proves anything, sir, it means that we're going to have a radical reappraisal of the criteria which underpins the Scottish Government scheme. Because, quite frankly, Chair, if you look at paragraphs 3.41 and 3.42 of this report, if we don't do that, communities such as Newton Stewart, which really at the moment will not qualify for access to Scottish Government funding, are never going to get a scheme which is worthy of the name. And that, to me, is the blunt fact of the matter. So what will happen, Chair, is that we were flooded in 2012, we're flooded in 2015, we'll continue to be flooded because this council, in the face of ever more stringent financial cuts and squeezes, will simply not have the money and the resources to do such schemes. And I'm not talking just about Newton Stewart, Chair, I'm talking about the other, Carfern and Castle Douglas and wherever. They will simply not have, in fact, the resources to address these schemes. And this is why, in my opinion, we need to impress on the Scottish Government that we have a radical reappraisal and a reassessment of the existing criteria. And I think if they don't do that, in a Newton Stewart context, I can tell you what will happen, because the town will continue to flood. I'm sorry to paint the doomsday scenario, but the town will continue to flood, in my assessment. You'll lose, the Victoria Street, and you'll lose, the shops, etc., in the very heart of it. And, a town with no shopping centre and all the rest of it will cease, as far as I'm concerned, to be a viable community. And as I've said, that to me, and to be fair to Dr. MacLeod in particular, I mean, she took the point that I was making, and that is going to have to be assessed. I mean, in addition, going back to a purely Newton Stewart context, Chair, from the wider context, we're talking about a 1 in 10. We're talking about a 1 in 10 scheme. I think I'm correct in saying that was what was mooted when we looked at it, sir. Now, the one fact of the matter is that that's nowhere near robust enough. So that's going to have to be, as I say, reappraised as well. I'm sure as the findings and the other studies for the other communities will likewise have to be reappraised. And we're really going to have to get after this and get it addressed as a matter of urgency. Otherwise, as I've said, I mean, that's the same, it might not recur again, Chair, for the next 15, 20, 25 years, but it could recur in 6 weeks' time, or it could recur in several months' time. And we can't allow ourselves to be held hostage to fortune to that extent. So while I really do appreciate the time, energy and effort and the professionalism which has been shown by the Council's employees, we've got to continue on this on an unremitting basis. And as I've said, to put pressure on those areas where it needs to be put on to get the radical reappraisal of the criteria, because as things stand at the moment, for communities such as Newton Stewart, there is no hope of future salvation, for want of a better term. And that's not an acceptable scenario, Chair. I'm grateful to you for allowing me to go on. Thanks.
I think, Alistair, it's a very valid point. I mean, members know that when you look at the flood prevention scheme proposals to meet the Scottish Government criteria, the proposal that came forward was a 1 in 10 year scheme for Newton Stewart. Now, it doesn't take me to tell anyone that, frankly, that's not good enough. The problem is that the higher your flood defence effectively, the less likely, the more expensive it becomes, and the less likely you are to meet the Scottish Government's criteria in terms of the benefit-cost ratio. So frankly, I agree with you, it does need a rethink by the Scottish Government of their criteria, because there's no point in us putting forward a flood prevention scheme for Newton Stewart that's 1 in 75 year or whatever, if they turn around and say, well, actually, it doesn't meet the benefit-cost ratio, it's less than 1, therefore you're not getting the money. And I think, to be fair, that point was highlighted by officers when they met with the Environment Minister last week and stressed that there does need to be a reappraisal of the Scottish Government's criteria to make sure that communities that have a smaller population, smaller number of properties, are not left out when it comes to taking forward these particular schemes. So I think it's a very valid point, and I think when we come to the recommendations, we may pick that up if we want to try to stress that particular point again as a committee. Okay, I'm conscious we've got a number of speakers, so I'll bring in Jim McClung.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just a couple of points of clarification. In paragraph 3.35, it talks about the extra capital funding of up to 5 million, although we don't know how that's going to be split up. It also refers to Appendix 2 and the fact that the Bellwyn scheme has been activated. The Bellwyn scheme, as it says in Appendix 2, is revenue support. I take it that's 5 million over and above anything that we get out of the Bellwyn scheme, considering this is for capital funding. And as a slight aside, 3.29, I'm glad to see that there has been liaison with all the different organisations. However, it mentions Chamber of Commerce. Please tell me that wasn't just the Dumfries and Galloway Chambers of Commerce, because the vast majority of businesses that are members of Chamber of Commerce in the Newton Stewart area would be Whitesands Chamber of Commerce.
One thing on that point for clarification for myself, this £5 million extra capital funding, what is it, if you're going pro rata with what happened before in our allocation, I think that would mean like £150,000 or something like that in Dumfries and Galloway. Is that correct? Am I reading this correctly?
I think the point is the money's not been allocated yet. Presumably we have to bid for that money as well.
I think that certainly the guidance we've had, it's not mentioned at all. It's only mentioned in the press release that came out at the weekend, and we need to follow that up with Scottish Government in terms of what the £5 million for. They specifically relate to infrastructure damage and it being a capital type allocation for £5 million. It then gave an example of the road that was washed out in Aberdeenshire. But we need to, we've obviously built up a picture of our damage costs, and we will share those with Scottish Government and ask them what the way forward is in terms of bidding into the £5 million, so that we have a chance of seeing some of that.
So there's no allocation as such? No, okay.
Same point, yeah.
So Jim's got a few questions in as well. Is it on that exact same point?
Well, it's in Scottish Government funding, if that you want to make that the same point. If not, wait my turn.
Sorry, say that again, sorry.
It's on Scottish Government funding.
Well, can we get Stephen to answer Jim's questions?
Yeah, sure thing.
I think the other point that you asked on the capital funding, my reading of the press statement is that the £5 million is out with the Bellwyn scheme. But I would imagine that Scottish Government are targeting it at specifically large parts of the road network, significant impacts on the road network. We certainly have a query from Transport Scotland to provide our data on where we had network impacts, and I will share with them the appendix that's in this report on the road side, so that they're aware of what the impacts were. But as I understand it, it was over and above the Bellwyn scheme costs, which are more, as you say, more to do with the direct costs of the response.
I'd be right in saying we're obviously compiling information with a view to potentially making a Bellwyn application, but it's, my take on it is that it's unlikely we'll be successful, given the fact, members will remember the storms that hit the west of the region a few years ago, in which the council invested somewhere in the region of £1.2 million in the clean-up operation, didn't get a penny from the Bellwyn scheme. There's a threshold there of over 600,000 alone that you have to spend, and the criteria of what that money has to be spent on, effectively protecting life and limb against danger, etc., makes it quite challenging, to say the least, to get any funding from the Bellwyn scheme. But obviously we should always compile whatever information that we have, and if it looks like we may reach that threshold, then we should certainly put an application in, but it's probably highly unlikely, I suspect. Okay, I've got a number of speakers. So is it on specifically on the funding, Jim, is it? Or do you want to...
It was, Chair, because we've been talking about funding, and it strikes me that we're offering an opportunity to folk here to apply to the council for £1,500, and this at a time of crisis for them. And if I'm reading this report right, we're not going to get this £700,000 from the Scottish Government until the second week in March, which is another 2 months away. Are these folk expected to apply and just sit and wait in a hovel for 2 months until the Scottish Government decides to submit the money to us, or are we upfront funding it? What's happening?
No, just for clarity, the first 700,000 you referred to was announced on the 17th of December purely for Storm Desmond. Now that obviously I think affected some of the region of 40 odd properties in Dumfries and Galloway. At the weekend, the government then announced a further £1 million for Storm Frank, and effectively rolled the two together. So up until Saturday, nobody who had been affected by Storm Frank was entitled to apply for a grant or get a grant. But from Saturday onwards, they were entitled to do that. And the guidance that came out, the government clarified that they still wouldn't pay the money until the end of March, but effectively we could pay the money and get the money back. As a result of that, I think we've processed today alone over 40 applications and are actually making payments. Now, we obviously couldn't do that before Saturday for Storm Frank because there was no commitment to give any funding for Storm Frank. It was only Storm Desmond. But since we got that commitment on Saturday, we've been able to basically move on that. Officers have visited in the last week alone 104 businesses and are supporting those businesses in terms of making an application. We're the first council in Scotland to actually pay out grants. So while there's been criticism by some people, the reality is that we're ahead of the rest of Scotland and others are playing catch-up. In fact, I know that other local authorities are looking at our application process in order to effectively do that. So we're well ahead of the rest of Scotland, and we're supporting these businesses quite literally as we speak.
I think that's great. I take it, this is now a rhetorical question, I take it we're going to visit every business that potentially has been flooded if we've not already done that, and we'll be happy to take applications from anyone who's affected. And I think it's a shame that the money's not following the spirit of the grant.
I think, members, it's very important that if you know of a home or a business that was flooded, don't presume that we know. Please tell us so we can check it off the list. Because part of the problem is collecting all the information. So if you know of properties, tell us anyway, so we can double check.
Okay, I've got is that Dennis? Got Dennis next, and then Ian Dick, then Ian Crothers, then George.
Thanks, Chair. I would like to talk about Desmond and under 3.3, the issue surrounding Langham, and the fact that we had the pod there and we had everybody there that literally could walk to look after this, and the fact that the River Esk in Langham didn't do what SEPA said it was going to do. It was at least 3 to 4 feet below where they predicted, and I've been going on for some time that I believe the floodplain issue in Langham is one that's stymieing development, and it's wrong, because the river has now changed its characteristics totally. We had more rain in 2009, and it was heavier in 2009, and we had as much rain as we had in 1997 when it did flood part of the town. So I really want an appraisal of the floodplain in Langham, because the river, instead of being an 8-day flood river, which it used to be, is now under 24-hour flood river because of the drainage in the forests and the fields. And this is an issue in Langham that is very, very causing a lot of concern, because we now have development sites within the boundaries of the town that were mills, etc., for many, many years, never ever flooded, are now struggling to do something because they suddenly appear in floodplains that will stop something like a care home, a hospital, whatever, probably being built on those sites. And these are the only sites available within the town where we can do something realistic. So I really would like for the whole thing to be relooked at, because, as I say, if that on Desmond did not flood the town, and it never got over any of the barriers. The only reason George Street was evacuated was because the wall along it was damaged. The water never got onto that street, and it certainly didn't get onto the other side of the town, Elizabeth Street, which is the one that would usually flood if it was going to flood. So I think there needs to be a reappraisal there. And the other situation was the one that it's called Homewood Place here. It's actually Homewood Drive and Meeklem Side, where it is extending along the back of a hill, in which now, instead of 1 or 2 properties, it used to get water coming through the garden walls. There's up to 20. And this is a scheme that, again, the staff have been talking about and looking at. But these are the type of things that we really need, to me, to be concentrating on, because these are the people that are suffering. Their houses may not be flooded, but the water is pouring through back garden walls, pouring around their houses, running down onto the roads, and it's constant. So underneath their houses are being soaked, and it has an effect. And this doesn't just happen when we have Desmond or Frank. This happens every time we have heavy rain. I mean, over the Christmas period, these houses experienced water running around them about 6 times from Desmond through to Frank, while everywhere else there was nothing happening. But on this situation, there was water pouring around these houses onto streets and then affecting houses further down the scale. So I appreciate that there is a meeting set up, and that we'll meet with Buccleuch Estates and that. But there was an article in the paper last week, and it was 25 years ago, and it was me congratulating a resident in Meeklem Side for helping clear the debris and the water from the floods that were coming through the gardens. Now, that's how long this has been going on. And there was a drain put in place that did work for a little while, but it stopped. And this leads me to the fact that I did drop a note to the leader of the council, because I believe we need to lobby the Scottish Government to set up a rural fund for flooding, specifically for rural communities and rural areas, for the simple reason, like Alistair was saying, that these are the areas like Carsford, even like parts of Langham, like Eaglesfield, that are going to be missed, that are going to struggle to get the money to do the job, while we spend on the massive schemes. I think last night on the television they were talking about 300,000 in Selkirk or something, and they were there, the minister was there looking all wonderful and saying how much more they were going to spend. But for me, it's the little places that don't always see the light of day when we get a lot of rain and they are affected, and nobody does anything. But when a big place floods, we all hear about it. And I really think it's time we found a way of trying to get something set up across rural Scotland that will help small communities and individual people to solve the problem.
Valid point, Dennis. Do you want to deal with it specifically on Langham? I think it's worth having a discussion around the actual funding of schemes. I mean, obviously, the government have indicated that, although it's a 1-year budget they've set this year, but they've still indicated that going forward they're looking to allocate £235 million to flood prevention schemes. But you're right, these schemes, as far as this region's concerned, are effectively primarily Langham, Newton Stewart and Dumfries. But what do we actually do in terms of those that don't meet that criteria in terms of schemes? I think there's a discussion to be had around how we actually get funding. There's also a debate to be had around how that money is actually going to be allocated. I'm not clear what that actually physically means in terms of when it'll be allocated and how it'll be allocated and what percentage we'll get, from the 230. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to the actual allocation. But I think when it comes to those smaller schemes, the actual funding of them at a time where budgets being cut significantly is obviously an interesting point, maybe something we'll pick up. But you want to deal with the specifically Langham issues that Dennis has raised?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. Just discussing the SEPA mapping issue in terms of the extensive flooding from the main rivers in Langham. We are as well concerned with the SEPA mapping extents. They're based on old information. We've undertaken a flood study in Langham, and we'll have better mapping, which has been passed to SEPA, and that will in due course be updated to reflect the potential extents. But I think in terms of perspective and the impacts that were felt during Storm Desmond in Langham. My understanding, the size of the event was between a 1 in 10 and a 1 in 20 year return period, which isn't vastly significant if we compare it to, say, Newton Stewart, which was above a 1 in 75 year return period. So while we didn't suffer with the water coming over the river banks in the town, a 1 in 75 year return period as was suffered, say, in Newton Stewart, would have, if that been in Langham, it would have been through properties. It was close to being, it was up at the top of the road level on Arthur Street on the east side of the river there. So we have the new mapping which we provided to SEPA. We're not ignoring Homewood Drive and the issues coming off there. And as you say, we have a meeting next week with various parties associated with that. But the river flooding is something we can't ignore, and we need to ensure that people and development is appropriate for the flood risk in Langham, and that information will be passed to SEPA.
Thanks, Chair. Fortunately, my own ward was largely unaffected to the extent that many others were. However, I attended, not least of all because a friend had a business in Newton Stewart, but also some of my constituents were really badly affected in their particular business. I want to preface any remarks by repeating what I said to Alistair on the phone during the 3 days over the New Year about my gratitude to the conduct of the men, both in this and women, both in this council, all involved in this, and also the emergency services. Having sort of experienced it firsthand in Newton Stewart, I thought they did an excellent job. It's the town I grew up in, and so obviously I had some kind of large affection for it. What the point I want to make about this is when that wall that collapsed in there was built way back in the 60s, the Cree never rose. Now this is a general point about a lot of rivers, I think, where the problems are occurring now and that didn't decades before. The Cree was one of the best salmon rivers in Scotland at one time, which it no longer is, despite the efforts of a hatchery further up. And the reason is the forestation. One of the things I think that the council, the government and any agencies that are involved in any future flood mitigation really need to do is where rivers have had forestation which they didn't before and have become spate rivers. There needs to be some kind of dialogue with the Forestry Commission. As I understand it, because I had some involvement with this hatchery, where you don't have the forestation near the river, the soakage, the ground roundabout tends to soak and it drips into the river rather than rushes in through drainage. And I think this is a point that needs to be made. There needs to be probably a higher level of dialogue with the forestry all over the region to mitigate this. This is where I think a lot of the problem comes from. It's just interesting that wall never existed before 1962, and it was only built because it finally came in there and flooded a hotel. The fact that it's managed to last this long, I think, given the construction, is somewhat remarkable. The other point I just wanted to ask about was, so anyway, and maybe if it's applicable, if you could maybe incorporate that into the recommendation somehow, that's one of the agencies that perhaps needs to be looked at in any future flood development. I think I'll just leave it at that at the moment.
Thanks, Chairman. Just as everybody else as well, commend the staff, council staff.
Oh, sorry.
No, just to commend the council staff, but also the fire brigade, police, and the local communities as well. I think it's important they got their sleeves rolled up, got mucked in, and helped as well. Welcome, the questions have been answered. Just in regards to Appendix 2, the Bellwyn scheme, how that'll apply. It looks like we've got 1.7 million allocated. Appendix 4 itself, it states within the report, it's come to in and around 2 million. So we're under budget, but it looks like, I'm just wondering if the Bellwyn scheme will compensate for that, and that's all I'm really looking to get answered at this point, because I think every other question's been answered. If we've got any idea in regards to that, because 150k alluded to earlier would be miles short, I think.
I think one of the points I would stress is that the figures in the report today are £2 million and rising. There's still a significant amount of work to be done to assess the scale of the damage. So while we've got a £2 million bill at the moment, that's rising. That £2 million bill doesn't include, for example, the fact we're currently paying out grants of £1,500 as well, and the potential to pay out grants of up to 3,000 at a later stage. So it will be significantly more, I think, than £2 million. So I think it's a valid point. Obviously, we've been allocated 1.7 million from the government. So where are we going to get the shortfall from to deal with the cost? I think it's a valid point. If it's not the Bellwyn scheme, then where's the money going to come from? It because it's up to us councillors to probably find the money, I suspect, at some point. But I do think it's a valid point to be made. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the funding allocation to councils being made, but the reality is what we're spending significantly outweighs the funding we're getting from the Scottish Government, and that's a challenge that the council's going to have as well.
Thanks, Jimmy. You've answered that well, but I think it's just a clarification in regards to the Bellwood scheme. I don't think it will cover it, so I think I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, so the Bellwyn scheme itself, what we've got to remember, the Bellwyn scheme very much applies to the response. The Bellwyn scheme is not a cover-all to pick all our costs up. And there are strict criteria associated with the Bellwyn scheme. And that's where an application is difficult, lengthy and detailed. But we're not discounting the need for that. And as we develop our information and our costs, we will certainly keep that in mind.
George Prentice next.
Thanks, Chair. Like a number of other members, I too was marooned for 36 hours with the side of the loch. I mean, Parton, it's, if you want to be marooned, you actually should be marooned in Parton because it's a very homely place. The unfortunate thing, as a result, all the houses were flooded, plus the hall, which, you know, had about 2.5 feet of water into it. The consequence of that is that we no longer have a sort of centre for the community, for community activities. We won't have for maybe 6 months, as far as I'm told, anyway. So we'll just have to live with that. The point of clarification I was actually wanting from James was, as we go about in the Glen Kens and we get flooded, and we get flooded down in Parton, and, you know, at Parton Mill and all the rest of it, there are various comments float about from the gates at Glenlocher were closed, they were open, Earlson Dam's going to collapse and flood Dalry. All these things come out. I was just like an assurance from James, to the best of his knowledge anyway, it's to the best of my knowledge, that Scottish Power actually were releasing water a couple of days before the Wednesday, in anticipation of the Wednesday, of that huge, because I've lived in Parton for 40 years now, almost 50, 40, but I've never seen a deluge of water like there was in that Wednesday. It was an absolute deluge. But I would just like James's comments on the various things that are said and not said, and, you know. Thanks, Chair.
Do you want me to take this one?
Go on, Brian, do you want to come in on that same point? Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I take George's point on board very much. But I would ask what the optimum levels of water in Lochdoon, Kendoon, Earlson, Kersfad and Loch Ken would be expected to be, and what those levels were in the week running up to the flood. Because I don't believe that Scottish Power are doing anything close to what they might do to alleviate the problems around their infrastructure, or what is their infrastructure. And looking forward to the massive power lines that they've been speaking about, and so on and so forth, they'll get little sympathy given the performance thus far. I asked this question before. I wasn't reassured then. I haven't been reassured with the events that took place and the recent deluges that we've had to deal with. And I definitely feel that there are means by which mechanically alleviations can be achieved that haven't been come close to, insofar as the question of loch levels are concerned?
Obviously, we have quite close contact with Scottish Power, and colleagues in the Castle Douglas office have had close contact with Scottish Power for many years with regards to issues as river and loch levels rise. The flooding events in Carshfern a couple of years ago led us to a community meeting with residents of Carshfern attending a meeting at Glenlee Power Station with Scottish Power officers. And there was an explanation of how the system worked and how it did or did not impact upon flooding at Carshfern. Following that, I can advise that, speaking to Scottish Power at the end of last week, beginning of this week, that they've further improved measures and prevent any water coming from Loch Doon into the catchment through the Drumjohn Power Station, which then leads into Carshfern, and they turned that off a number of hours before the flooding occurred in Carshfern. With respect to Parton, we will be, there's an action upon ourselves along with colleagues in DG First to meet with Scottish Power to go over full details on that, but that was a specific one on Carshfern. Castle Douglas, Clattern and Shores Loch, I was advised by Scottish Power that the Blackwater Adee, which drains into Clattern and Shores, was the whole catchment, the whole runoff from that catchment was contained within Clattern and Shores and was not spilled into the Dee-Ken catchment, which would have further increased flooding. So from the information we have from Scottish Power, I'm quite happy to go and meet with them again and set up, as they see fit, meetings with communities and councillors to discuss further the scheme. But from the information we have from them, certainly the Clattern and Shores one is an interesting one. Their levels in the loch went up 8 feet in depth. 8 feet in, yeah. So you can imagine over the size of Clattern and Shores Loch, for those of you that know it, significant volume of water was retained there and not put into the Dee, which would have increased flooding at Castle Douglas if it had gone in there. The system in general does a very positive flood risk management for that catchment.
Back for a second, Chair. It just so happens that our house is actually built on top of the old railway embankment at Parton. You've got the embankment which goes down to a field. Along the edge of the field is a normal wire fence. We could stand at the front of our house on top of the embankment on the afternoon of the Wednesday at 12 o'clock. All the posts were visible, the whole fence was visible. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was gone. Now, that's 7 feet. That was how much the whole loch rose within 2-3 hours.
Come above your embankment, no, George, no. It didn't come above your embankment, no. It just shows you how effective embankments are at holding back water, isn't it? Okay, who do we have next? Ronnie Ogilvie.
Thanks, Chair. I've got relatives that live in Carlisle, and it's obvious what happened in Carlisle. The question I want to ask is, okay, there's some short-term, immediate stuff that has to be done, but long-term, there has to be lessons learned from places that have spent a lot of money on flood defences. If we take Carlisle and Cockermouth, both were breached, which might have a local impact in our thinking. Carlisle, a lot of the problems, because of water come over the embankments and all the flood defences, was difficult to get away. In Brunton Park, the football ground was trapped. The water just couldn't get away. So what we should be doing is listening to neighbouring authorities to learn lessons, because they spent millions on trying to defend Carlisle and Cockermouth and other places. It didn't work. I know it's unprecedented rainfall, but if we're going to put in flood prevention things, I think we've got to look at what works well and what lessons. Their officers and the experts must say, well, hang on, maybe we didn't quite hit it right. Now, they're talking about floodplains and stopping the water from coming down, further up the rivers, and I'm sure that's an answer, because the rain runs down the hill, thank goodness, because I live at the top of a hill. But seriously, we should be looking at UK-wide, Cumbria, other places that have been through this as well, and before we start spending millions and millions of pounds on things. So we do learn lessons, so any money we do invest has the best chance of being successful.
Just for clarity, the schemes worked because the schemes held back what they were designed to hold back. I think that's an important point. No scheme failed. from the information we've got, because they were designed to hold back a certain level of flooding, and they held back that second level of that level of flooding. The fact they were overtopped because the flooding levels were higher is a separate issue. You know, I think it's important to distinguish between the 2 points. And it does come back to the point that was raised earlier by Alistair, that when it does come to the criteria set for flood prevention schemes by the government, they need to take into account the scale of some of the flooding that we're seeing, particularly in Newton Stewart. You know, that a 1 in 10 year flood prevention scheme, frankly, is not going to be adequate. Therefore, it needs to be a more robust scheme. Okay, do we have any other? Finlay, and then Finlay, Jeff, and Brian.
Thanks, Chair. We've been round the houses now, and we realise there's issues right across. But I think it now comes to the nitty gritty. I had an email on Christmas Eve from a pensioner in Carsfairn who said she couldn't sleep at night, fearing the water came through her back door because it had happened twice previously. So you can imagine the upset there was when on the 31st or the 30th of December, her worst nightmares came true. Now, what makes it worse is that actually, going back to the report, 14th of July, there was a commitment to progress the flood study using revenue funding to progress this scheme, and it's sat on a shelf and gathered dust. What I would like today, rather than us just go over what's happened, is some sort of commitment with this report, which actually has costings in it that's been produced at some cost to the taxpayer. Sitting there, they will actually progress it, and I would like a commitment on the timescales of when the proposal will be brought forward and when we'll be likely to see those flood prevention measures put in place, because that's the only thing the 29 householders in Carsfairn are looking for, because they don't want to go through another 3-4 months with the fear of flooding. We've done the work. We've made a commitment through committee here to fund it, and I think we need to progress that and take it to the next stage where the preferred proposal is looked at and the money found to progress it.
Do you want to respond to that, Stephen?
I think in terms of the Carsfairn project and the solution there, we'd committed to undertaking the study. There was no commitment given on forward funding of works at that location.
Finlay?
Well, that's not just quite what the wording is. It says to develop the work in the Carsfairn flood study, which we've done, progressing it utilising revenue funding with a future report. Now, this was in July, so we've not had a future report. I don't know whether there's one sitting in the wings ready to be presented to us. But then, there's with a mandate for the council to fund a capital project if the development work provides that the scheme's viable. On what basis would it be viable? Is it whether it works or whether it doesn't work? Where are we with this?
I mean, I think the first thing to highlight is that because it's not in a potentially vulnerable area, it won't get any funding from the Scottish Government. It's obviously something we'll need to take forward as a council. I think that needs to be stressed, yeah.
I mean, the particular problem we have with this location is not in a potentially vulnerable area, and therefore it doesn't feature in the flood risk management strategy published by the government, and therefore doesn't feature in the local flood risk management plan, except if we add it in as an extra project, if we decide to do that and take that forward. Where that leaves us as a council is that we would need to fund the development of a scheme at that location, the design, the promotion, the consultation. We generally looking at with community support and limited resistance in terms of objections. We're probably looking at least 2 years, to get a scheme started on ground in most locations for a flood protection scheme, working through the options, doing the consultation, going through the statutory processes, and moving forward with a preferred option. But that's an issue that we haven't. It hasn't been addressed in terms of the capital investment strategy for that scheme to be taken forward, as far as I'm aware.
But why hasn't it? There was a decision taken to take this forward in July. If we make a decision as a council, why is it sitting on the shelf? Why have we not progressed it?
No.
And it does say that to seek approval for it to be fully funded by the local authority. So we're aware that it's not in one of these areas, but the decision was still taken to bring this forward. It's going to be no consolation to the folk in Cosfairn that we made a decision in July, but nothing's been done. You know, if we're saying it could take 2 years, let's get this let's start it now. Can we have some commitment that the decision that was taken will be followed through?
Well, I think that's the point that's being made. The point is that there's no funding being allocated by the local authority towards the actual any actual scheme itself. What we've got coming is a report in March that I think, and officers can maybe just clarify what's going to be in the report in March, is a report on the implementation of the local flood management plan, which covers all the schemes, those that are within a potentially vulnerable area, and also presumably we're going to incorporate schemes that are not within PVAs as to where we are with those particular schemes. So I think that report's obviously coming in March, and I think members will be looking for a comprehensive report on where we are with each individual scheme. I think it's important within that report to have clarity, and it may very well be we'll need to speak to the Scottish Government more, but have clarity as to how the funding that they have indicated will be allocated, how will that actually be allocated, and what the sort of timelines are on that. And I think members just need to know what the potential scale would be of the schemes that are not likely to get funding from the Scottish Government. Cashfairn, I think, is one. The issues around Money Ive as well, I think would be correct in saying. So I think that needs to be quite a comprehensive report, which I know officers are working on already. But is there anything in that report, anything that should be in that report that I've missed that officers want to highlight? And if there's anything that members think should be in that report that I've missed as well, then that'd be quite helpful. But I'll get officers just to confirm what will be in the report that's due to come in March.
Effectively, the report in March will elaborate on the items that are listed at 3.37 in terms of the commitment by this council made in July for the local flood risk management plan to contain those elements of work. And it will contain the detail, it effectively contain the draft local flood risk management plan that would be published in the summer, setting out the details for taking these projects forward.
Okay, Ronnie and then Alistair, is it on that particular point? Is it okay?
Is it just on that particular one as well? I understand where everybody's coming from on this, but I think Alistair previously, and then it was Dennis, and everybody was in agreement about looking at, you know, that we've got flood schemes on the go, or we've got flood prevention schemes on the go, and things we want to look at, but we haven't got the capacity to do that. We haven't got the money to do that as a council. We need help from the Scottish Government. We need them to look at their criteria as well. You know, their criteria isn't suitable. And I made that point actually to Nicola Sturgeon when she was in Newton Stewart, and I spoke to her. I said that, you know, this isn't, you know, Dumfries is a region, and it's, I was corrected by the distance, but it's 130 mile by 30 mile wide. It's got individual pockets of, you know, areas that flood, different difficulties within these areas. It's not one big hole that can be encompassed by a Belwyn, you know, or whatever, or funding any kind of sort like that. So we need to be looked at. We need to lobby the Scottish Government to look at their criteria, look at our areas, look at the rural areas and what the impact flooding such as this has on these areas, and get them to change their criteria so that they fund us as well. Because we can't, we're getting cuts in funding all the time from the Scottish Government, and we can't fund schemes like that's been talked about, because you fund one scheme like that, there's another 20 in the background waiting to come as well, and we can't do that. And let's be honest with people, we can't do that ourselves.
Coming after that, is that okay? It's on the same point, Alistair, is it?
It's in precisely the same point, Chair. I mean, without sort of causing you any embarrassment, as far as I'm concerned, you've summed it up in your usual succinct and cogent style, and I couldn't agree more with the comments that Ronnie has made. As I've said earlier, what we need here is to beat a path to the door of the Scottish Government, you know, urging a radical reappraisal of the criteria currently in place. Otherwise, you know, these wee communities are never really going to get adequate flood prevention schemes. I'll leave it at that for the meantime.
Finlay?
Yeah, I 100% agree with both Ronnie and Alistair, but and just put me right if I'm wrong, but it does say we've already agreed to progress the Cosfairn flood study utilising revenue funding. That was something that was agreed. It's not something that's to come up in March and be agreed again. But what I'm suggesting is that decision that was taken, we actually haven't progressed it.
I could just come in, Chair. The decision that was taken back in July was actually for a programme of work over the next 6 years, starting in the next financial year, 2016 to 2022. And it was agreed that we would look at Cusfairn, because it wasn't in a PVA, that we would continue to try and move that forward using what is fairly modest revenue funding that we have on the flood risk management side. But within that kind of 6-year programme, that was one of the areas that we needed to target going forward, recognising that there wasn't necessarily that Scottish Government support if we had a scheme that was worthy of or viable for capital investment.
I think we have to be clear, if members want that work accelerated, then they need to decide to allocate the funding towards it. I mean, the reality is we can't magic up money and we can't magic up officers to carry out pieces of work that are not funded. So if members do wish this to be a priority, they need to come up with where the money is going to come from, which in the current climate will be a challenge, you know. But I think members are clear that the report we're going to get in March sets out where we are with those schemes that are likely to be funded by the Scottish Government, but I think we need clarity on how that money is likely to be allocated, where we are with those schemes like Cusfairn and others that won't necessarily receive any government funding, a sort of update on where we are with those particular schemes. I think it's pretty clear that members want us to lobby the Scottish Government to revisit the criteria for the allocation of funding to make sure that schemes that currently won't have a particularly high benefit cost ratio like Newton Stewart can benefit from Scottish Government funding. If we do decide that the scheme is not just going to be 1 in 10, we want it to be a more robust scheme, but there's no point in doing that unless we get government funding. So I think members are absolutely clear. We need to lobby the government to make sure they revisit that criteria and also to consider what sources of potential funding there could be to deal with the smaller schemes, the rural schemes, that frankly don't come onto the radar when it comes to the capital funding from the government as well. I think that needs to be highlighted as well, because there are literally dozens of small areas across the region that suffer from flooding, and there is currently no central source of funding in order to deal with that. I think I've probably covered most of the points, but if members think I've missed any other point, could you... Ian, sorry. Yeah. Ian had a point about the forestry and utilities.
Yeah, just you know, looking at any organisations where they could assist with mitigation, specifically the forestry in the case of rivers.
That's a valid point. I think there's a piece of work that I know that officers are already doing around utilities. We had a situation in Dumfries where Scottish Power had to once again switch the power off alongside the Whitesands and McClue Street because the substation, for whatever reason, a number of years ago, I think, was relocated to the back of the courtroom in Dumfries, which is not that far from the river. Now, if you want something to flood, you build it near a river. If you don't want it to flood, you don't build it there. So for some reason, they built it there. We've literally seen a guy in a boat go around there and switch the power off. The problem with that is the power was off in the Whitesands. It was also off in the shops in McClue Street that weren't even flooded in order to try and protect that. So I think there's a lot of discussions that I know are ongoing, but it would be helpful maybe in that report to update members on the discussions that are taking place with the various utilities, the ones that Ian mentions, I think the ones that George mentioned as well. It would be good to get an update on where we are with those discussions as well. Because it's not just a council issue, it's an issue for utilities and forestry, etc.
But just to add on one other, occurred to me, a number of constituents had actually brought up there. If we look at, as a council, look at the drain management, on many occasions drains have been blocked that could otherwise have assisted. And if we just look at the patterns of drain clearing.
I think that. Dennis, do you want to come in?
Yep. It was just to back up Ian's point. As I say, the River Esk used to be an 8-day river in the 60s and 70s, now up and down in 24 hours. And that's the difference that with forestry and drainage and that's come in. Doesn't get into peat moss anymore, it runs straight off. And I think that's the case right across. The final question, Chair, when we prepare these flood defences, what are we targeting? Because we've got this myriad of 1 to 100, 1 to 10 days, 1 to 1,000. What are we actually targeting these defences on? Because we could have the 1 in 1,000 next week, and it really is what we're preparing for.
Well, thanks for the optimistic look forward there, Dennis. I mean, I think that the point is that as things currently stand, if we're looking at government funding, what we're targeting is a positive benefit cost ratio. So it's that, there's a ratio there that so in the case of Newton Stewart, to get the funding to be above that, you're talking about 1 in 10. The Whitesands, you're looking at 1 in 75. I think they vary from area to area. There's a lot in the 42 projects across Scotland that are 1 in 200, but if you were to build a 1 in 200 in the Whitesands, they'd be marching in the street because, of course, the barriers would have to be a lot higher. So it's about getting that compromise. What are communities prepared to accept the work in their area, and what type of scheme is likely to secure government funding? from scheme to scheme, it's a balance on that. It'll be interesting to see if anything changes nationally that says you have to look at a minimum height as a result of what's happened right across the UK. Maybe that will come, I don't know, but we'll wait and see. Alistair, do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I could just add information for members, just as a sum up. On the various criteria, we've already written to the Scottish Government asking for clarity. One, on the return rates. Two, on the non-PVA communities. And the third one being on the cost-benefit ratios. We've already done that, and we want to see clarity on that. The SEPA maps are 1 in 200, so everybody can view a SEPA map and look at what the potential is for flooding in the future. To actually try and build something like that in the communities we have, it's going to be drastic from a point of view of landscape, from a point of view of what people can live with. And our rivers are important to us. That's what makes Dumfries and Galloway attractive. We'll have to consider all these issues. It's not straightforward, and when we take it to public consultation, that's when these issues arise, as we've seen in the Whitesands, although the Whitesands would have stood up well to both these events had it been in place. Whether there's more work we can do in the catchments to retain water, again, speaking to other agencies like the Forestry Commission, like the Hydro people, etc., I think that needs looked at as well. There's always the issue about trawling out the rivers to make them lower. That's always been disputed in many cases. I think just all the issues just need revisited, but they need revisited nationally. It's interesting that this has affected the whole nation this time. It's not just one particular place. And if we include the north of England, it's exactly the same. To think that many, many millions have been spent on schemes and they've been overtopped. And these schemes are very, very good schemes. I had a look at the Keswick one yesterday, as late as yesterday, and the sheer fear that the height of water overtopped that defence is just absolutely mind-boggling. When you see the depth of water it must have been there. So this is an incredible challenge, and we have had our priorities. Members have agreed our previous flood priorities: Whitesands, Newton Stewart, and Langham. Other decisions have been made at the P&R committee before Christmas about the funding or not funding these. I think this just concentrates our minds and requires us to have another look at this, and our report will do that coming forward, particularly the smaller communities that have been affected. I can confirm that we've called in the utilities and the hydro to have a good chat with them about the resilience and the sustainability of their own apparatus. Nothing worse than electricity going out and we have to effect rescues in the pitch black in a boat from properties, heightening everybody's risk and well-being. And these are the issues that the agencies had to face over that period. So I can assure members we're doing everything possible with the resources we've got. And remember, these resources are dwindling. But I can safely say I'm proud of all my staff and the whole council and the commitment that they have made to this. But quite honestly, our hearts have to go out to these poor people, and we need to do everything we can to give them a hand.
Thanks very much for that, Alistair. Okay, members, I think I would just like to end by placing on. Do you want to come in, Brian?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, you did have me there to come in. Yeah, can I thank yourself and officers for production of this report, especially on the back of the hard work that's had to be carried out in dealing with the issues in the wider region. And I would thank all those who assisted, both from Council, Fire and Rescue and other agencies. The one aspect I haven't seen mention in here has been the closure of the West Coast Main Line with the scouring of the Lamington Viaduct. And I was surprised, to say the least, when I heard that passengers were being bused from Glasgow to Carlisle. about 7 years ago, there was something of a fanfare around the fact that passing places had been completed on the Nith Valley line, establishing it further as the major diversionary route on the West Coast Main Line. So I'm curious as to where the status of the Nith Valley line has disappeared to. It would also appear that Virgin Rail have intervened and, rather than bus the passengers back and forth, have been taking them by rail from Stranraer to Glasgow, but meaning that a change was necessary at Carlisle. Were the infrastructure of the Nith Valley line meeting with the status accorded it as the alternative to West Coast Main Line, then it would simply have been a continuance of the train from Carlisle to Glasgow, only up the Nith Valley line. Now, I don't understand why that didn't happen automatically. And if it's a question of the infrastructure no longer meeting the requirements because of additional carriages on rail now on the West Coast Main Line and therefore passing places not being big enough, then let's get the passing places in place and lobby to have the Nith Valley line meet the original status that was intended. That would not only enhance the service for the users on the West Coast Main Line, but also the people of Dumfries and Galloway, at least in the east, insofar as having a proper infrastructure running up through the Nith Valley. And I would like to think to build on that and improve the general service between Glasgow and Carlisle. But I don't understand why the automatic move taken on the back of the Lamington Viaduct event was to bus passengers from Glasgow to Carlisle.
Someone that's about to try and get a train to London the next hour, I've got a vested interest in the West Coast Main Line, I have to say. The trains are obviously going through the Nith Valley line, the Virgin trains are going through the Nith Valley line, but you're saying obviously you're getting bussed instead of getting on that train, so yeah. Stephen, do you want to?
I think what happened in the interim was the short term were running a lot more freight up the Nith Valley line, and the passengers were being bussed. I think as of this week, they've flipped the passengers onto the Nith Valley line, and they're running a faster service, a kind of limited stop service up through the Nith Valley line for the West Coast Main Line. The London-Glasgow, or the Carlisle-Glasgow link is now coming via. I'm not sure what rolling stock they're using or whether there is a transfer of passengers, but the timing's interesting. There's a consultation that Swestrans will be looking at in terms of the next investment phase for the rail network in Scotland, and it's something we'll get the team to have a bit of a look at in terms of the response back to Network Rail on investment on the Nith Valley line, in terms of the importance of it because of the recent closure on the West Coast Main Line.
No, absolutely. The Virgin pendulums are definitely going through Dumfries as we speak. They're not stopping in Dumfries, of course. They're going through Dumfries to Carlisle en route from on Glasgow. You know.
Well,
they go through 5 miles an hour.
I would suggest that as partners in Swestrans, anything that the council can do insofar as any enhancements that can be attracted to the Nith Valley line has to be to the longer term benefit. I know Jeff Ace, when he was finance director at the Health Board, made the point that the difficulty in recruiting for the Health Board and for others in specialist areas for the Health Board were invariably caused by the partner being a professional and looking to continue to pursue their career, and that the connectivity was the big fall down insofar as attracting people to Dumfries. I would suggest that that's probably the same across in Stranraer, because the connectivity simply isn't there. So any enhancements for the Nith Valley line has to be a positive in the future development of the economy of the region. Can I just say finally, Chair, that it's been an interesting discussion and debate, and whilst in the main no one has tried to, as it were, electioneer on the back of the misery of the people have suffered through recent events, we will go away and consider the paper, consider the discussion, and write to you with our considerations and any further questions that arise for your consideration and response. Thank you.
And Jim, last point.
It's the same point, Chair. I sit on the 76 Action Corridor Group with the Sederunt Council officers support that, and we're working hard to get additional enhancements on that Valley line. I can tell Brian that Bellio have redesignated the Nith Valley line to a scenic route, and that will introduce new and better running stock. And I see Virgin carriages on the rail network as we speak, so it is being used. The bridges were upgraded at the time to accommodate the larger running stock that the Virgin trains use. So they are currently, and have in the past, but certainly currently using the Nith Valley line. So it is serving its purpose.
Before we start debating the new buses for West Coast to Glasgow as well, that have just been, we're kind of moving way off the track of flood maps.
Just an assurance that Nith Valley line's fine.
I'll bring it to, I've got a train to get to London in an hour's time. I'm going to test you very soon on it. But I mean, I think that people have had a good opportunity to raise issues. I think if any other members have got any particular issues I think needs to be dealt with in the March paper, then please bring those forward so officers have got them. I just want to echo the sentiments of other members and placing on record that for Minniton, I think our thanks to all the staff for the response they had to not one but two major flooding events facing the region. And when I say staff, I mean council staff, but also our partners in the major emergency services, the police, the fire service, Coast Guard, and others who supported that response. And also, I think in particular, local communities. We've got some in the region, I think, 57 community resilience plans in place that allowed us to communicate directly with a lot of communities across the region who absolutely rose to the challenge of supporting their neighbours and supporting the local community. So I think we should thank them for their response as well. And as a council, we're committed to continue to support those communities in the weeks and months ahead. And thanks very much to members for your attendance today.